My parents chose my brother's award over visiting me after a car crash. Now they want my savings to bail him out of a fraud scandal. I refused. About 2 weeks ago, I, 32F, was involved in a horrific car accident. Another automobile struck me from the side as I was making my way home from work. The force of the impact caused my automobile to overturn. I was later told by the paramedics that I was fortunate to be alive. I ultimately needed emergency surgery due to internal bleeding, 2 cracked ribs, and a damaged leg. After the procedure, I stayed in the hospital for a week to recuperate and try to make sense of things. It was difficult to be in the hospital, both mentally and physically. All I wanted was for my parents to come see me as soon as I woke up. I assumed that as soon as they learned about the accident, they would rush over. Even though I didn't anticipate them staying the entire time, I would have been so grateful for a visit. Rather, they were absent for days. I waited for them to stop by or at least give me a call, but they didn't show up. Before I even received a text from them, I believe it was 4 days. To answer your question, my parents were told what had transpired. The hospital informed me that they had contacted them several times and that they are my emergency contacts. A day following my admission, the hospital was able to contact my parents, but the nurses reported that they appeared unconcerned about the situation. That obviously upset me a lot, but I attempted to explain it away by saying that perhaps they were too busy or that something else had come up. Fortunately, my phone was still with me because my possessions survived the collision. Every day, at intervals of 5 to 6 hours, I texted my parents, but I never heard back. In the hospital, every day was a nightmare. I attempted to give my parents a lot of wiggle room because I really wanted to see people I knew, but it became more difficult every hour. Fortunately, I wasn't entirely alone because my pals, who reside in other states, were able to get in touch with some family members who live nearby. A family acquaintance came to visit me on the 6th day in the hospital and remarked in passing how wonderful it was that my brother was receiving recognition for his efforts at an award ceremony. I didn't know what she was discussing. She filled me in, but she appeared perplexed that I didn't know. As it happens, my parents didn't come to see me. Instead, they were at my brother's award ceremony. They were aware that I was in the hospital, but instead of helping me through a difficult period, they decided to attend my brother's special occasion. They were so busy getting ready for his big event that they had taken so long to get in touch with me. They were more concerned with their perception of his ceremony than with their daughter's injury. Let me be clear before anyone accuses me of jealously admiring my brother. I don't find it hard to see why they would be proud of him. I am aware that he is gifted and has put a lot of effort into all that he has accomplished. He has always been the golden child, which is the problem. Since we were little, he has received nothing but acclaim for everything he does, while I have largely gone unnoticed. He currently works for a large corporation and is really successful, therefore this award meant a lot to him. However, I was actually convalescing from surgery. A visit or even a phone call to check on me would have been the very least they could have done. I only wanted my parents to be concerned about me, and that was about all I was asking for. They didn't even blink an eyelash when I could have died that day. I was angry and humiliated. I attempted, but was unable, to explain my parents' actions. I then made the decision to contact them and let them know how offended I was. I texted them to express my disbelief that they prioritized my brother's prize over my well-being. I expressed my pain at them not even checking in on me. I didn't have to wait long for an answer for the first time since the accident, and to be honest, I wish they hadn't responded. Their words simply made me feel worse. At first, they attempted to defend their behavior by claiming that they couldn't miss my brother's award because it was a once-in-a-lifetime accomplishment. I informed them that if they had only taken the time to come see me sooner, they wouldn't have missed the event at all. After a while, they gave up trying to argue with me and told me that it was pointless to waste time coming to see me while my brother was out there making the family proud. That hurt more than words can express. It seemed like they only considered me as an afterthought. I wish I could say that their behavior astonished me, but it has always been like this. My brother was perfect as a child. Every action he took was praised. Every accomplishment he made, whether it was a scholarship, a fancy job, or perfect grades, was celebrated. In the meantime, I was constantly in the background. It was never good enough, even when I performed well. Every error I made was viewed as a disaster, and I never received the same level of help. I had the impression that they had already determined I was a failure and that nothing I did would change their thoughts. A week after my brother's award ceremony, my parents unexpectedly arrived at the hospital. I was initially perplexed because, following our last talk, I had given up on contacting them. I knew my parents well enough to understand that they weren't worried when they came to see me. They arrived with phony smiles on their faces and bouquets in their hands. They made an effort to strike up a conversation about how I was doing, but it was obvious that their thoughts were elsewhere. I advised them to just say what was on their mind because I could tell that whatever they were thinking about was going to irritate me. The fact that they showed so little concern for my survival was offensive enough. I didn't need their phony pity. I didn't have to exert much effort. When my mother learned that my brother had been arrested for fraud at his company, she burst into tears. It turned out that my brother was at the heart of a huge fraud scheme that was discovered by the corporation he worked for. He had been directing funds into his personal investments by falsifying the company's accounts. Following an internal investigation, everything was turned over to the police, and he was apprehended after a coworker alerted the superiors. He is currently being charged with major offenses like wire fraud, forgery, and embezzlement. My parents had apparently already spent a large portion of their cash on hiring attorneys for him. They came to me because they didn't have enough money left to pay his bail. They asked me to utilize the money I had saved up from my work as a project manager at an IT business to help him out. Additionally, they asked whether I knew anyone who could help in any manner or pull some strings. I had the impression that I was merely a tool to clean up my brother's mess, not even their daughter. I continued to experience mental and physical pain. It was unbelievable to me that they would turn to me for assistance after everything. It was like being slapped across the face. When I was laying in a hospital bed after surgery, afraid and alone, they didn't give a damn. But now that their favorite child was in danger, they needed me. I felt bad about it. Perhaps I ought to have assisted for the benefit of my family. The other side of me, though, was angry. The same brother who has always had everything handed to him, why should I save him? My parents have always protected him, so he has never experienced any repercussions. Now, they expect me to do the same. I informed them that I would not assist. I said that even if I did have the money, I wouldn't feel obligated to help him out. I made it obvious who they cared about more and reminded them that they hadn't even come to see me yet. They insisted that I was being self-centered and that families should be together. I couldn't get myself to care, even though they said I would regret not helping my brother. To be honest, my brother has always taken precedence over me. I was never enough for them, no matter how hard I tried. They wanted me to simply forget all the times they disregarded me, left me out, and made me feel unimportant now that they needed something from me. I felt in control of the situation for the first time in my life, and I wasn't going to let that go. I'm laying in my hospital bed right now, feeling a mixture of anger and remorse. Since I said no, my parents haven't spoken to me, and I know they're upset, but I simply can't bring myself to care any longer. I'm done trying to gain their approval. I've wasted too much time. AITA for standing up to my parents after everything they've done to me and not helping my brother. They keep repeating that family should always remain together, therefore I feel like I might be the villain. However, the way they have treated me throughout my life, and particularly now, is something I simply cannot get over. I feel like I've had enough, but I'm not sure what to do. First update. Hello everybody, I wanted to express my gratitude for your support of my initial article. I was able to maintain my position because of that. Although I didn't anticipate updating so quickly, a lot has transpired since then. I was eventually released from the hospital a few days after my parents arrived. I can walk, but my leg fracture requires crutches, and breathing is still difficult as my ribs heal. Going home, finding some serenity, and escaping the turmoil were all things I was looking forward to. The moment I arrived at my apartment, that hope was dashed. I knew things wouldn't go well as soon as I spotted my folks, who were waiting for me just outside my door. They must have called the hospital to find out the precise time of my discharge because I hadn't told them. They wasted no time at all. They began hammering me before I could even remove my keys. They were incensed and informed me that by not helping my brother, I had gone too far. It's the most irate I've ever seen them. They seemed more unhappy with me for refusing than they were with my brother's deception. They talked endlessly about how family should always come first. They said I was selfish and vindictive. They claimed that I was using this circumstance as a means of exacting revenge on them because I had resentment toward my brother. They didn't care that I was still recovering from my near-death experience a week prior. They simply viewed me as a barrier to their beloved son's rescue. They had the audacity to say that they expected me to step up now. They said that this was my opportunity to show that I wasn't a letdown and that I could be part of the family by acting morally. It was crazy. They essentially acknowledged that I wasn't related to them and that helping my brother was the only way I could make amends. Things truly took a turn for the worst when I informed them outright that I wouldn't do it. My mother began crying at my door, screaming things like, "We've already lost one child, and now we're going to lose two, and you're punishing us for loving him more." In contrast, my dad simply became more irate and wasn't attempting to shame me. He repeatedly accused me of being cold-hearted and self-centered, claiming that I had no regard for the family and that I would regret it once they were gone. To be honest, it was everything I could do to not lose it. I was told I was a bad person for not cleaning up my brother's mess, even though I was already fatigued from the hospital stay and could not stand on my crutches. The fact that my parents intentionally treated my brother better and that they love him more than I did just served to exacerbate the situation. I didn't give up though. I warned them that I would call the police if they didn't leave and that I wouldn't pay a dime for his bail or legal bills. After that, they eventually backed off, but not before insulting me once again. My brother's case made headlines a few days after that onslaught at the door. It seems that the deception was far larger than we initially believed. Evidence that he had been transferring business funds for more than a year, some of which had been laundered through fictitious business accounts in his name, was discovered by the police. Additionally, as part of a broader inquiry, they found that he had assisted several colleagues in concealing their embezzled funds. My brother is now being charged with conspiracy and money laundering in addition to fraud. He might spend a significant amount of time behind bars if convicted. The fallout has been harsh. My parents are really freaked out. My brother's reputation has been utterly destroyed after they boasted about his accomplishments to everyone they knew for years. People aren't buying into their attempts to control the situation by claiming that it's all a misunderstanding and that it will all be resolved. When word spread that his son was embroiled in a significant fraud case, my dad even lost a significant client. They're fumbling, and it's obvious they don't know what to do. Naturally, they came stumbling back to me. They made no effort to conceal their desperation this time. They indicated they needed my assistance, just this once, to get through this because they were under a lot of stress. They insisted that they would have an opportunity to fix things, and keep the family together, if I helped my brother, but I understood exactly what that meant. Keeping the family together meant preserving the appearance that their ideal kid had done nothing wrong, and fixing things meant hiding his transgressions. They've gone completely silent after I told them no once more. Nothing, no texts, no calls. They seem to have given up on me, to be honest. They most likely view me as a hopeless failure who abandoned the family when they most needed her. But what do you know? I no longer give a damn. I feel like I'm in charge for the first time in my life. Knowing that my parents just saw me as a fallback option, someone to control in case something goes wrong, hurts. However, it also feels fantastic to put myself first for once and to finally say no. To appease them, I won't help my brother, and I won't allow them to use guilt to get me to correct a situation they started. They must now deal with the repercussions of their decisions. Second update. Since many of you have been inquiring about my condition, the truth is that things have gotten even more problematic. It was my brother who sent me an email. Since he doesn't have access to a phone while incarcerated, he persuaded one of his friends, who still maintains his innocence, to contact me on his behalf. I was initially inclined to simply remove it without reading it. I assumed it was just another attempt to use guilt to get me to assist him. However, my curiosity overcame me, and I opened it. My brother said he was being framed in the email. Although he vowed he wasn't the mastermind, he acknowledged that he was a part of the fraud at his company. He claims that the superiors used him as a scapegoat to hide their own wrongdoing. He even said that while he was trapped taking the fall, certain powerful executives were still able to move freely. He pleaded with me for assistance, not for our parents but because he believed that I was the only one who could save the family from disintegrating entirely. I was genuinely offended by that line. Perhaps it was because my brother finally admitted how poisonous our parents have been. He acknowledged that they have consistently mistreated me and exploited him to stroke their egos. Seeing him acknowledge that was odd because he had always complied with it. I couldn't get rid of the impression, though, that he was just saying anything he felt would persuade me to assist him. He also said that I should help him by saving the family, which is what my parents have been saying ever since this fiasco began. I kept asking myself if there was any truth to what he was saying, even though I promised myself I was done with all of this. Could it be that he was actually being set up? What if I was mistaken about how huge this was? I wanted to know for sure, part of me. I therefore made the decision to investigate. I mentioned the problem to a buddy of mine who is a lawyer and whom I trusted. Since they were not involved in the case, they were unable to provide me with a complete legal breakdown. However, they did offer me some guidance on where to find additional information. After doing some additional research, I discovered that my brother's story wasn't entirely untrue. There was no doubt that he was a fraudster. However, based on my understanding, it appeared that he wasn't the one controlling everything. Evidently, he was not the only victim of the fraud plan. My brother was utilized as a pawn by several high-level executives who had been transferring corporate funds for years. Since he was responsible for overseeing specific accounts, he was held solely responsible when things went south. My brother was left holding the bag because these superiors had purposefully separated themselves from the grunt work. I felt torn after learning all of this. I was upset that he was involved in something so dubious in the first place. On the one hand, he was involved in a serious crime regardless of whether he was the mastermind or merely a pawn. He wasn't just an innocent bystander who unknowingly became involved in anything. He followed through because he knew what he was doing. Most likely, he believed he would never be caught. However, I did feel a little sorry for him at the same time. Knowing that he was exploited by those with greater strength and expertise in hiding their trails is difficult. It's obvious that those executives were well versed in their roles and made sure my brother would bear the brunt of any negative outcomes. If he hadn't been raised in a household that encouraged him to take shortcuts as long as you were successful on the outside, I couldn't help but wonder how things may have turned out. He most likely believed that he was untouchable because of our parents' unceasing protection and adulation. My folks were unexpectedly silent when I told them what I had discovered. Although they didn't want to acknowledge it, I believe that they secretly understood my brother wasn't an innocent victim. They persisted in promoting the same story, claiming that I was selfish for not prioritizing the family and callous for not assisting him, rather than admitting the reality. It was like speaking to a stone wall when you spoke to them. I've made the decision to stop interacting with them at this time. I've made up my mind and I'm sticking with it. No matter how much he wants to blame the executives, my brother still made his bed and now has to lie about it. My parents are at fault if they wish to continue supporting him. If the situations were reversed, I wouldn't ruin myself trying to help someone who wouldn't do anything for me. To be honest, I've not felt so at ease in a long time. Even though my family will never believe it, I know I made the right decision. I've been treated like I didn't matter for far too long, and I'm sick of it. Although my brother's predicament is awful, I am not responsible for fixing it. Once again, I want to thank everyone who has helped me along the way. Although it hasn't been simple, it has been a huge comfort to know that I'm not the only one who feels this way. Third update, I now have enough information to provide you all with an update, even though it has been more than a month since my last post. I'll start with what my parents did when they realized that insulting me and pleading with me wouldn't work. They made the decision to do something else, which was to make me even more miserable than I already was. They contacted several of my aunts, uncles, and cousins to express their disdain and selfishness for not helping my brother. They gave the impression that my refusal to assist was motivated by spite and that I was simply sitting on a mound of money. All they said was that I was a monster and should not be trusted. Only until one of my cousins contacted me and informed me that my parents were spreading unfavorable rumors about me did I learn the truth. They cleverly omitted the fact that they left me in the hospital and hadn't contacted me since, completely twisting the tale to make it seem like I was harboring resentment. I was only ever summoned to assist my brother. I was hurt at first. Even though I had defended myself, it seemed like I was being punished again. I believed that I would be left on my own with no one to support me. However, an unforeseen event occurred. Several distant relatives began contacting me rather than supporting my parents. It turns out that my parents' treatment of others and constant emphasis on my brother caused them to sour relations with a lot of individuals over the years. I was unaware of the depth of this. I started hearing stories from relatives I hadn't spoken to in years, and to be honest, they were all more startling than the last. My brother once borrowed a substantial amount of money from her husband to invest in a business venture, according to an aunt who informed me about it. Naturally, the plan failed, and my parents severed all ties with my aunt when she attempted to recoup her money. They even propagated the idea that my aunt was avaricious and unsupportive of her family. According to another cousin, my brother blamed a parking lot attendant for my uncle's car crash at a family gathering a few years ago. To keep the family from being embarrassed, my parents supported him and made sure the rumor didn't get out. They accused my uncle of attempting to damage my brother's reputation when he attempted to address them about it. There were several examples like this one, where my parents either covered up my brother's wrongdoing or silenced anyone who dared to speak up. My brother and another family member had a business partnership, but my parents ruined it because they believed the relative wasn't renowned enough to be affiliated with their son, according to one relative. It was both startling and reassuring to hear all of this. I wasn't insane. It's true that my parents have a long history of ignoring others and hiding behind my brother. For a long time, I believed that I was somehow to blame for my parents' treatment of me, that perhaps I wasn't good enough or didn't live up to their standards. It was never about me, though, as I now see. They constantly wanted to keep my brother safe at any costs. They even avoided family members who questioned them or obstructed their path. For those who wonder why my parents were so in need of my assistance, The answer is because I have established a strong life for myself in spite of their lack of encouragement. I've developed excellent relationships and managed my finances wisely in my role as project manager for a reputable IT company. I've saved money and made prudent investments. My parents knew I had the money, which is why they were so frantic. They failed to realize, however, that I didn't want to help just because I could, especially for those who have treated me like an afterthought my whole life. There has been an update on my brother's case. My parents eventually gathered together enough cash from loans and favors to get him out of jail after I refused to bail him out. However, the inquiry was far from finished. My brother made the decision to assist the authorities a few weeks ago. According to what I understand, he provided information about the higher-ups who were complicit in the scam, which aided in the prosecution's progress. He was able to receive a lighter sentence as a result of his cooperation. He will serve a year and then perform community service in lieu of years in prison. To be honest, that doesn't make me feel any better. His cooperation is commendable, but that doesn't change the fact that he initially decided to participate in the plot. Furthermore, I don't think this event will significantly alter my brother. I don't think he will quit having my parents clean up his mess anytime soon. For my part, I've decided to permanently cut off contact with my parents, which I probably should have done a long time ago. They are blocked on all of my platforms. I even instructed the front desk of my building to deny them entry if they returned without warning. I'm tired of serving as their fallback option, scapegoat, or emotional target. I'm surprisingly not depressed about it. I had assumed that leaving my family would be a great loss, but instead it feels liberating. I can now live my life without having to continually compare myself to my brother or ask for morsels of affection from people who would never show it to me. The family members who got in touch have been incredible. They've shown me that I'm not alone, and I feel supported for the first time in a long time. It's weird because after years of my parents excluding me, I've unexpectedly found a family. In fact, I'm excited to get to know these relatives better because many of them have invited me to family events that my parents won't be there. One of my aunts even expressed regret for not recognizing the situation sooner. She claimed that although she always thought something wasn't right with the way my parents treated me, she kept quiet about it because she didn't want to start a fight. She is now one of my biggest supporters, along with a few other family members. For the first time, I feel hopeful, even though I have no idea what the future contains. I appreciate all of your help and guidance during this trip. Reading your comments helped me realize that I wasn't insane for sticking up for myself, even though it hasn't been easy. It feels so amazing to finally feel like I'm in charge of my life. My husband planned a dinner with his ex, made me feel like the rebound, and now our marriage is falling apart. Original post. Throwaway account. I really need input from people who don't know us, so their opinions aren't biased. I'm very emotional and tired, so I apologize in advance for any typos. My husband, Jack, male, 36, used to date Emma, female, 34, for years. They broke up because Jack didn't want to get married or have kids. Emma moved away, and about a month later, Jack met me, 30. I don't look like the typical girls Jack had been dating. For example, Emma is super tall, blonde with blue eyes, and has a PhD. I'm petite, 110 pounds and short. I'm a nurse, I have dark curly hair, and I'm an introvert. Apparently, she was a social butterfly. Jack has a group of friends that he's known since childhood. They are like brothers to him, but from the very beginning, they didn't like me. They still call me the rebound girl. At our wedding, during his best man speech, he joked, "We all thought rebound girls were temporary, but our brother Jack made an honest woman out of her." Everyone laughed. I didn't. They also joked that I'm just a nurse, and that Jack downgraded, since he has a PhD, technically postdoctoral. From a doctor to just a nurse. For my own sanity, I ignore them, and Jack still hangs out with them regularly. Last weekend, there was a fundraising gala, and Emma was there. I saw her for the first time in person. Jack introduced me, and Emma said, "Yeah, I know who she is." The guys weren't kidding when they described her. Haha. Jack quickly changed the topic and asked how long she was in town. She said for a week, and then they ended up chatting all night, reminiscing about old times. I decided to talk to other people. Later, at bedtime, Jack mentioned that he should go out to dinner with Emma. I assumed he meant inviting her over, so I asked what kind of food she likes so I could make it. He said no, it would just be the two of them. I asked, like a date? And he replied, no, just two friends going to dinner. Why are you so insecure? I asked him, do you miss her? Do you miss being with her? He said, I'm not going to lie, it felt great talking to her tonight. There's just something about her. I got really upset and told him he can do whatever he wants, but if he goes on this dinner date, I'm done. He thinks I'm overreacting and being insecure. So, wise people of Reddit, is this rebound girl overreacting? Update. It's 4:45 a.m., and I didn't sleep last night. I thought I'd post an update. I decided to stay awake and talk to him when he came home. When he did, I told him, I could have tracked your location, shown up at the restaurant, and done so many things to get my answer. But I'd like to believe you have enough respect for me to tell me. Were you on a dinner date with your friends or Emma? He showed me pictures and said, no, it was all of us, me, my friends, and Emma. I was stupid enough to feel relieved, even feeling bad for accusing him. Then he told me to sit down because we needed to talk. He said that after seeing Emma at the gala, he couldn't stop thinking about her. He decided to take Monday and Tuesday, yesterday, off and spent the whole day with her, while I assumed he was at work. He went on about how strong their connection was, how they couldn't stop talking, and how much he enjoyed being with her. He told me I'm a sweet woman, but he never felt that spark with me. He said that at dinner, Emma was laughing and having fun with everyone, and it felt like old times, compared to me being quiet and uncomfortable around his friends. He said it's best if we go our separate ways. I asked him if they had sex, and he didn't reply. I asked again and again, but he still wouldn't answer. I was so upset and asked, why did you marry me if you're not over her? He said he thought I was the one, but these past 2 days made him realize there's no spark between us. He kept going on about how sweet I am and that I'll find someone too. I told him to shut up. I said, Emma knew about your cancer treatments. Where was she when you needed a friend? Why didn't she ever call you back then? He went quiet. I feel stupid for ignoring all the red flags over the years and wasting 6 years of my life with him. My next step is hiring a lawyer and finding my own place. I feel so numb right now. I'm going to contact my brother to help me. Thank you everyone. Ken Specs brings guest for sleepover if his name on the house title October 23, 2024. I will see a lawyer soon. My ex and I got into a huge argument tonight. We share a house that we are currently living in. He sleeps in our bedroom, I sleep in the spare room. He told me tonight that he wants his girlfriend to stay with him, yes at our house, while she is in town. Can I legally call the police to kick her out? Or since the house is under his name too, he can bring anyone and cops can't do anything. I suggested he moves out so he can invite whoever he wants, but he doesn't want to pay mortgage for our current house and rent, for a place he would be staying. Update 3. So many people have asked for an update. There isn't much to share except that my ex has been extremely difficult. He and his affair partner, AP, took time off work. They are traveling and having fun. He refuses to respond to or acknowledge me. I no longer have access to his money. I'm working extra shifts to cover the mortgage. I've met with 2 lawyers, but I realized I can't afford their fees. Thankfully, I have access to free legal advice sessions through my Employee Assistance Program, EAP, at work, so I'm currently on the waiting list for it. I'm planning to send him the bill for half of the house expenses since we separated. Meanwhile, he's out traveling, and I'm working overtime to pay the mortgage. I can't put the house on the market because I need his signature on the papers too. So, basically, no real update on my situation. His family has pretty much ghosted me. His mom initially acted sympathetic but then stopped replying. His friends never liked me, so that isn't much of a surprise. On the bright side, I do have an empty house now. I love how quiet and peaceful it is. I can cry for hours without worrying that anyone will see me. Edit. Yes, Emma knows he can't get her pregnant. I thought I was clever by telling her, their long-term plan is either adoption or using a sperm donor IVF. I felt disgusted hearing about it because adoption was our plan. Now, it's his and her plan. I am not the original poster. Please don't contact or comment on linked posts. My parents chose my brother over me, hid my inheritance, and now seek my help after his fraudulent betrayal. My parents supported my brother after he slapped me during my son's birthday celebration. When he attempted to take their house, which was actually mine, years later, they pleaded for assistance. Eric, my younger brother, is 28 million, and I am 35 million. Favoritism was so blatant in our home while I was growing up that it was painful. My parents behaved as though Eric was a priceless treasure that had to be safeguarded at all costs from the moment of his birth, while I was just there. I still recall my 10th birthday celebration being cancelled due to Eric's cold. They couldn't risk him feeling excluded from the festivities because he only had a cold, not even a fever. As we aged, things only got worse. I was the debate team captain, a straight A student, and even received a partial scholarship for my SAT results. My parents, however, hardly noticed. They were too preoccupied in complimenting Eric on passing his classes with C grades. The same thing happened at every parent-teacher conference. They would ignore my accomplishments and concentrate on how they could support Eric in doing better. At the age of 18, I moved away with the intention of succeeding without their continual comparison. I earned a degree in computer science, worked several jobs to pay for education, and got a fantastic position at a software business. I met my wife, Darla, 33F, there. She is intelligent, kind, and, in contrast to my family, she genuinely acknowledges my accomplishments. James is our 1-year-old kid, and we were married 5 years ago. Eric, however, never left the house. After 1 semester, he left community college because it was too stressful, and returned home. At the age of 28, he continues to live with our parents and works part-time at a nearby video game store. He spends much of his time playing video games. This is entirely made possible by my parents. They cover all of his expenses, including his meals, bills, auto insurance, and game subscriptions. My mother literally broke down in tears when I suggested that Eric might want to look for a full-time job, saying that I was being too harsh on her sensitive little boy. We threw James's first birthday celebration at my parents' place last month. They insisted, even though I didn't want to. Mom remarked that being a part of his nephew's special day would mean a lot to Eric. In an attempt to maintain harmony, I accepted even though I should have known better. The celebration got off to a decent start. We used streamers and balloons to adorn the garden. James was enjoying himself greatly in the company of his loved ones. Up until lunchtime, everything was going smoothly. I was searching the crowd for Darla after stuffing my plate full of food. At that moment, it occurred. Eric was standing just behind me as I turned around and unintentionally ran into him. His new limited edition gaming t-shirt got some of my food, which was pasta with marinara sauce, on it. Since I understood that gaming gear can be pricey, I instantly apologized and offered to buy him a new shirt or even pay for dry cleaning. Eric flipped out rather than accept my apology. He began to yell that I always ruin everything for him as his face flushed. He cited instances from our early years when he claimed that I intentionally attempted to harm him, such as when I broke his game console by tripping over its wire. I was 12, he was 5, or when I received the last piece of pizza at his 10th birthday celebration. I hadn't eaten all day because I was helping set up his party. The room fell silent. We had everyone's attention. Eric gave me a forceful slap across the face before I could fight myself. The room was silent as the sound reverberated. My cheek ached, but the next thing that transpired hurt even more. My mother hurried over to fuss over Eric, not to see how I was doing. She began to inquire about his well-being and whether he required ice for his hand after he slapped me. As though I had done something wrong, my dad simply stood there with his arms crossed and gave me a disapproving look. I surveyed the space. James, who had begun to weep from the chaos, was being held by my wife, who was standing there in shock. While some people glanced away awkwardly, others murmured to each other. I stood there with a red mark on my cheek, and there was Eric, being comforted by our mother. I asked my parents whether they truly approved of their son being beaten at his own child's birthday celebration when I had finally found my voice. My mother's reaction? "You're older, you should know better. Look what you did to his new shirt. You know how much he loves his gaming merchandise, he's saved up for weeks to buy that." I lost it at that point. Years of repressed annoyance were released. I told them that throughout his life, they had allowed Eric to act in this way. They had never reprimanded him, encouraged him to improve, or held him responsible for anything. I brought up the fact that, at 28, he was still living at home and playing video games, when I had put a lot of effort into building my life since I was 18. I explained that Eric had a gaming tournament that day, thus they had missed my college graduation. How they were so preoccupied with making sure Eric didn't feel excluded that they hardly assisted with my wedding. How Eric felt uncomfortable around infants, thus they had only been to see James twice since he was born. If I couldn't respect my brother, my dad became irate and urged me to leave their home. That's exactly what I did. I told my wife we were going, scooped up my son, and left. "Look how upset Eric is now," was the reason my mother broke down in tears, not the fact that I was going. The calls and messages began to come in later that day. I had to apologize to Eric, my parents informed me over the phone. He apparently locked himself in his room and wouldn't go because he was so unhappy about his damaged shirt. Some family members called to let me know that I should have recognized Eric's sensitivity and refrained from provoking him by spilling food on him. According to other texts, I was being dramatic about a little slap, and should be more understanding because I'm the older brother. Eric, my parents, and the family members who stood up for him were all blocked by me. Some relatives who were present at the time of the incident expressed their support for me, stating that they had always seen how unfairly I was treated but had refrained from speaking out to prevent creating a scene. Too late, Too little. Now, a month has passed. My wife completely agrees with my decision to cut off communication. She stated that she never wants James to believe that hitting people is acceptable or that he must put up with abuse because it originates from his family. Some family members claim that since Eric is my younger brother, I should forgive him and that I am being too harsh. However, I fail to see why, simply because we are related, I should continue to put up with mistreatment. First update. I haven't communicated with my family in 2 years. The absence of their incessant drama has brought tranquility to life. At 3 years old, James is doing well. In addition, we have a 6-month-old daughter named Emma. In addition to purchasing a larger home and receiving advancements at work, Darla and I have been content with our lives as a family of 4. Everything changed last week when I received a call from an unidentified number. My mother was crying uncontrollably. Her cries made it difficult for me to grasp what she was saying at first. I was shocked by what I heard when she eventually relaxed enough to talk. Eric was selling their house after somehow getting it transferred into his name. They had been given 2 weeks to vacate by him. There was nowhere for them to go. But the biggest shock wasn't even that. I was stunned to learn that the house had truly always been in my name. Mom says my grandfather left the house to me in his will when he died 15 years ago. I had just started college at the age of 20. Due to their own plans, my parents never disclosed this inheritance to me. In an attempt to persuade me to give the house to Eric when he was more stable, they had been waiting for the right time to tell me that they wanted Eric to ultimately own it. They resided in my house for 15 years without claiming it as their own. They allowed Eric to live there for free for 15 years while I worked several jobs to pay for my own place. While they saw me struggle to save for a down payment on my first home, they kept this a secret for 15 years. Mom started sobbing as she talked about how they never imagined Eric would turn on them in this way. He had been behaving oddly for several months, apparently. He had begun discussing moving to a different state to live with some buddies who played online games. They required funds for streaming equipment and a game setup. At that point, he began inquiring about who owned the residence. How Eric was able to get the house registered in his name is still a mystery to me. He took care of the paperwork during their trip last month, according to Mom, who kept saying it. I can only presume he falsified my signature because I never signed any transfer forms. The situation's irony is nearly comical. Since the house was genuinely mine, the same parents who evicted me from their home 2 years ago are now pleading with me for assistance. The brother who attacked me during my son's birthday celebration has now betrayed them by attempting to take my belongings. Mom talked on the phone for an hour about how they were going to be homeless and that they had nowhere else to go because they had spent all of their savings on Eric over the years, including paying for his failed college attempt, purchasing his gaming gear, paying for his insurance and car payments, and even paying for his convention attendance. She also disclosed that Eric's behavior worsened after I stopped communicating with him. He declared he was going to become a professional gamer and completely quit his job. He played games all day and streamed to his modest internet fan base at night. He would have tantrums, smash things, and threaten to move out when they suggested he look for a job. My father also picked up the phone. He attempted to defend their conduct by claiming that they just had their 2 sons' best interests in mind, that they had intended to ultimately notify me about the bequest, and that they never imagined Eric would act in such a way. He even went so far as to suggest that perhaps none of this would have occurred if I had kept in touch. Without saying anything, I hung up. I received more calls from different family members pleading with me to assist my parents. Some people made an effort to guilt-trip me by bringing up their advanced age and vulnerability. Others said I was being just as evil as Eric by not helping them. Darla believes that since they are still my parents and appear to sincerely regret their situation, we ought to assist them, but I find it difficult to sympathize. For 15 years, they misled me about my own property. While I put a lot of effort into purchasing my own home, they let their golden child to reside there for free. When he attacked me in front of my family, they stood up for him. The only reason they contacted me now was to ask for something. To find out how Eric was able to get the house in his name, I got in touch with a lawyer. The attorney attested to the fact that my grandfather's will did, in fact, leave me the house. Because I never signed any transfer forms, she is investigating the documents Eric used to transfer the property and concludes that his claim to the house would not stand up in court. She added that we could file a lawsuit against him for forgery. I'm unsure right now. Since my parents are still my parents in spite of everything, I have a part of me that wants to help them. However, I also believe that they deserve this because they deceived me and allowed Eric to continue doing so for so long. Perhaps this is the wake-up call they've been waiting for to realize the true nature of their beloved golden child. First update. Although it wasn't simple, my lawyer assisted me in regaining the residence. Yes, Eric had falsified my signature on a number of documents. Additionally, he falsely claimed to have my power of attorney while lying to other agencies. After nearly 3 months of legal proceedings, Eric has been evicted and the house is once again in my name. I gained additional knowledge regarding what truly transpired during the court processes. For months, Eric had been organizing this. He had discovered my grandfather's will while searching through our parents' old papers. He began looking into ways to transfer property ownership after realizing the house was legally mine. He even used a fictitious name to join some internet communities on real estate fraud. The quality of the fake documents was very high. According to my attorney, Eric ought to have had assistance from a property law expert. Later on, we discovered that he had been using money he borrowed from our parents to pay an internet consultant, claiming the money was for gaming equipment. Eric lost it all when the police arrived to evict him. He locked himself in his room and wouldn't leave. After hours of haggling, he eventually agreed to go when the door was threatened to be broken. He would not stop yelling that we were all out to destroy his life and that everyone was against him. I was urged by my parents to allow them to remain in the house. After obtaining my location from a family member, they arrived at my house and genuinely collapsed in the driveway. They have nowhere else to go, Mom said, sobbing. Dad was crying, something I had never seen him do before, and he was apologizing for keeping the truth about my inheritance a secret. They acknowledged that they had used up all of their retirement funds on Eric, including loans they had taken out to finance his gaming career, costly gaming settings, car payments, insurance, and the tuition for the 1 semester he attended college. They had genuinely thought that one day he would succeed as a streamer and repay them. At last, Dad acknowledged that they had overindulged Eric. He claimed that over the years, they had observed indications of his manipulative behavior but had consistently made excuses for him. They believed he would eventually mature and become responsible if they provided him with adequate time, resources, and support. Mom disclosed the ways in which Eric had deceived them on the house transfer. He had persuaded them that it was merely a formality to assist him in launching a gaming company. He assured them that after he became a successful streamer, he would look after them forever. They wanted to be sure their baby boy wouldn't turn on them, so they trusted him. Darla and I talked it over, and I agreed to let them stay under certain restrictions. In order to remind them that they are living in my home, they must first pay rent, which is not market rate because they are now on a fixed income. Second, if they wish to have any kind of contact with me or their grandchildren, they must go to family therapy. Third, without my express consent, they are never allowed to let Eric into the house. The eviction was not well received by Eric. He began threatening everyone, including Darla, our parents, and myself. He accused me of turning our parents against him and wrecking his life. Since it was his home, and he had nowhere else to go, he insisted that I allow him to return. I kept all of his threatening messages in case we needed them later, and I banned his number. Eric was couch surfing at his gaming pals' houses when I last heard from him. His ambitious intentions to move in with his online pals apparently fell through when they discovered he was broke. Since he is my brother, other family members advised me to assist him, but I declined. He attempted to use forgeries and fraud to steal my residence. In my opinion, he is no longer my brother. Third update. It has been an interesting 6 months. As agreed upon, my parents have been going to therapy and paying their rent on time. Although it's a gradual process, they are attempting to mend our friendship. There are fresh disclosures every week regarding the various ways in which their partiality harmed both of their boys. At last, Mom acknowledged that they felt bad for allowing Eric. It seems that they were having financial difficulties when Eric was born, so they were unable to provide him with the same luxuries that I enjoyed throughout my early years. They began to overindulge him in order to make up for it. What began as purchasing him additional toys evolved into a lifetime of condoning misbehavior. During one therapy session, Dad lost it when he saw how their behavior made Eric into an entitled monster and drove me away. He acknowledged that they secretly knew I would be all right because I was a responsible and diligent worker. They therefore gave Eric their whole attention because they believed he required greater support to thrive in life. Eric wrote me a long email last month. He asserted that he had also been going to therapy and had come to terms with his errors. He claims that after being evicted, he reached his lowest point. His streaming career never took off, and none of his gaming pals wanted to take him in permanently. He currently shares an apartment with 3 roommates and works at a warehouse. Eric apologized in the email for everything, trying to steal the house, faking my signature, and assaulting James on his birthday. He claimed that treatment enabled him to see how his perspective of the world had been distorted by his parents' partiality. He promised to pay the rent this time and asked if he may live with our parents again. I turned down his request. I sent the email to my attorney, who suggested that I stop communicating with him because of his track record of deceit and deception. Even though I inherited the house, I worked hard to obtain everything else in my life. Even if he says he has changed, I will no longer tolerate his behavior. I continue to face criticism from some family members for charging my elderly parents rent. They claim that I'm being unkind and that families ought to provide unpaid support to one another. However, this is about boundaries and consequences, not money. My parents only expressed regret when they wanted something from me, allowed my brother to be abused, and concealed my inheritance for 15 years. They're fortunate that I'm allowing them to remain at all. Mom still occasionally remarks about Eric's difficulties. She said last week that he might lose his car because he couldn't afford his car payment. I quickly put an end to that by telling her that he is an adult who attempted to defraud me out of my house. If they wish to, they can assist him, but not while residing in my home. Darla says we should ask them to dinner occasionally so they can see their grandchildren, but she believes I'm being fair. Every now and then, James inquires about his grandparents. I'm thinking about it, but I'm not yet prepared for frequent family get-togethers. The treachery is still too recent. This setup works for the time being. I have authority over my property, my parents have a secure place to live, and Eric is at last coming to terms with the repercussions of his behavior. Clear limits and punishments can sometimes improve family relationships. I've discovered that being family does not entail being exploited by others. It entails respecting one another's limits and being accountable to one another. The conclusion.
Boyfriend found out how much money I have. He wants me to pay off a house for us, buy a new car, and fund a trip for him to go abroad. Should I end it? In the heart of a bustling Canadian city, nestled among the clamor and chaos, there lay a small modest apartment that seemed almost misplaced amidst the towering skyscrapers. This was my sanctuary, a place painstakingly curated to embody the values of simplicity and tranquility that I held dear. My name is Mary, and at 28 years old, I had crafted a life quite different from the opulent one I left behind in Italy. Here, in this understated nook, I found peace. The apartment was a one-bedroom affair, with walls painted a soft creamy white that caught the gentle morning light. The furniture was minimal, a comfortable couch, a sturdy coffee table, and a small dining set that had seen better days but still stood strong. The decoration was sparse, with a few carefully chosen pieces that spoke more of sentiment than of monetary value. A small balcony overlooked a quiet street, where the sounds of the city were muted, just enough for me to enjoy my morning coffee in relative peace. Living here, my needs were few, and my desires even fewer. I had learned early on that happiness doesn't come from things, but from experiences, from quiet moments spent reading a book, from laughter shared with a friend, from the soothing ritual of brewing tea. My job as a digital marketing consultant afforded me the luxury of working from home, allowing me to shape my days as I saw fit. This life of minimalism was a deliberate choice, a stark contrast to the lavish, almost grandiose lifestyle of my family back in Italy. My parents and extended family lived in sprawling estates in the countryside, surrounded by vineyards and olive groves, their homes adorned with art and antiques that spoke of generations of wealth and culture. My childhood was filled with long, languid summers under the Italian sun, dinners that stretched into the wee hours, and conversations filled with passionate gestures. It was beautiful, yes, but overwhelming. A life where every moment felt orchestrated, every smile a bit too polished. It was during my university years in Canada that I began to shed the weight of those golden shackles. I embraced a life where I could be just Mary, not the heiress, not the future custodian of centuries-old oil paintings or rare manuscripts. Here, I was free to build a life that resonated with who I truly was, not who I was expected to be. Enter James, my boyfriend of 3 years, a Canadian native like myself in age but vastly different in experience. James came from a middle-class family, his life a tapestry of hard work and modest achievements. He was kind-hearted, with a gentle demeanor that belied his rugged exterior. When we met, it was as if pieces of a puzzle had fallen into place. We shared similar interests in music, loved the outdoors, and both cherished the quiet moments of life. His respect for my simple lifestyle only deepened my affection for him. James never knew about the wealth I had left behind. It was a part of me that I kept hidden, not out of shame, but out of necessity. I feared that revealing my family's wealth might introduce a wedge between us, that it might make him feel inadequate, or shift the dynamics of our relationship in ways I couldn't control. I wanted to be loved for who I was, not for the assets I would one day inherit. In my heart, I believed that preserving this secret was for the best, protecting both James's self-esteem and the purity of our connection. Our relationship was built on the foundations of mutual respect and shared values. We spent our weekends exploring local markets, cooking meals together, or watching old movies curled up on the couch. It was a peaceful, fulfilling existence, and for a while, I believed it would always be this way. But life, as it often does, had other plans. The catalyst came unexpectedly, in the form of an invitation to a family reunion back in Italy. It was an event I couldn't avoid. My grandmother's 80th birthday, a milestone that demanded my presence. As the date approached, the thought of bringing James along filled me with both excitement and dread. I was eager for him to see the country I loved, to experience the warmth of my family. Yet, I was terrified of how he might react when faced with the reality of my background. With a heavy heart, I booked our tickets, telling myself that it was time to face whatever consequences might come. As we packed our bags and prepared for the journey, I felt the weight of my secret heavier than ever. Little did I know, this trip would unravel the delicate threads of our relationship, exposing not only the truths I had hidden, but also the vulnerabilities we both carried. What lay ahead was a test of love and trust, one that would redefine the future of our relationship forever. The plane descended slowly through the cottony clouds, revealing glimpses of the lush Italian countryside, a stark contrast to the sprawling urbanity of Toronto. As the wheels touched down on the runway, a surge of nostalgia washed over me. Italy was not just my birthplace, it was a repository of my earliest and most cherished memories. Beside me, James peered eagerly out of the window, his face lit with the excitement of a child. This was his first time traveling outside North America, and his enthusiasm was palpable. We navigated through the airport with our luggage rolling behind us, the chatter of Italian filling the air like a familiar melody. I could feel James's curiosity bubbling as he tried to catch phrases and words, his eyes wide with fascination. As we stepped outside, my uncle Luca was waiting for us, his arms wide open, a broad smile spreading across his face. "Benvenuti," he exclaimed, enveloping me in a warm embrace before turning to James with a firm handshake. "And you must be James. Mary has told us so much about you." James chuckled nervously, exchanging pleasantries in his halting Italian, which he had been practicing for weeks before our trip. As we drove away from the airport, the landscape transformed from urban sprawl to verdant vineyards and rolling hills dotted with olive trees. The beauty of my homeland unfolded before us, each turn and dip revealing vistas more breathtaking than the last. Our destination was my grandmother's estate in Tuscany, a place that seemed suspended in time. The house, a sprawling villa built in the Renaissance style, was perched atop a hill, overlooking acres of vineyards. Its ochre walls glowed under the setting sun, and ivy climbed generously over its ancient stones. It was a stark embodiment of the wealth and history of my family, a visual testament to a legacy that stretched back generations. As we pulled up the gravel driveway, the sound of the tires crunching underfoot, James's expression turned from excitement to awe. "Mary, this place is incredible," he whispered, as if speaking too loudly might shatter the moment. "I grew up playing in those vineyards," I said, pointing towards the green expanse. "And every stone of this house has a story." The grandeur of the villa was overwhelming even for me, who had seen it countless times before. As we entered, the vastness of the entrance hall with its high ceilings and portraits of stern ancestors, seemed to impress upon James the reality of my heritage. The house was alive with the sounds of preparation. The reunion was to be a grand affair, with relatives coming from all over the country. During the following days, James was introduced to a lifestyle so vastly different from our simple contained existence in Canada. Each meal was a feast, each conversation a boisterous symphony of voices. My relatives, adorned in fine clothes and speaking with an effortless elegance, moved through the rooms with a grace that belonged to a different era. James tried to blend in, his usual confidence replaced by a quiet, observant demeanor. I watched him as he interacted with my family, his eyes often wide with a mix of admiration and incredulity. It was during a grand dinner, under the chandeliers of the grand dining room, that I first noticed a subtle shift in his attitude. "Everyone here seems to have their life figured out," he remarked quietly as we watched my cousins animatedly discussing politics and art. "It's like they're playing a game where everyone knows the rules except me." I squeezed his hand, trying to offer reassurance. "They've just had more practice at this kind of thing," I whispered back. As the days passed, the initial shock of the opulence gave way to a budding curiosity. James's questions grew more pointed, his interest in the specifics of my family's wealth more pronounced. "So, how does it all work?" he asked one evening as we walked through the vineyard, the sunset casting long shadows on the ground. "Who inherits what? How do you manage it all?" It was a discussion I had hoped to avoid, but there, amidst the rows of grapevines, I found myself opening up about trusts, management, and the responsibilities that came with such inheritance. James listened intently, nodding as I explained, but I could see the wheels turning in his head, the calculations forming behind his eyes. The remainder of our stay was marked by a series of such revelations. Whether it was the casual display of an antique vase worth more than our apartment, or the old family jewels that came out for a cousin's wedding. Each instance seemed to embed a small wedge between us. James's demeanor evolved from one of simple curiosity to something tinged with a hint of entitlement. The boundaries of our relationship, once so clearly defined by mutual respect and simplicity, began to blur as notions of what could be started to infiltrate his thoughts. By the time we were preparing to leave, the air between us had thickened with unspoken words and unasked questions. The drive back to the airport was quiet, a reflective silence that seemed to hold the weight of our shared experiences. As the Italian countryside receded into the distance, I couldn't help but feel a sense of foreboding. The trip had not only exposed my wealth but had also unearthed the fragility of our bond. We returned to Canada carrying more than just our suitcases. We brought back a changed dynamic. A new awareness that would soon test the very foundation of our relationship. The seeds of doubt and change sown during those sunny days in Italy were poised to grow into challenges that neither of us could have anticipated. The return to our modest apartment in Canada felt jarring after the lavish expanses of my ancestral Italian villa. As James and I unpacked our suitcases, there was an unspoken understanding that something fundamental had shifted between us during our trip. The light-hearted laughter that had once filled our space seemed dulled, replaced by a pensive quietude that neither of us dared to disturb. In the days following our return, James's behavior began to subtly change. It started with small comments, offhand remarks about, when we have a bigger place, or, our future home. At first I thought these were just aspirational dreams, a way for him to process the grandeur we'd witnessed. However, it soon became clear that his views on our financial dynamics had shifted dramatically. One evening, while I was preparing dinner, James broached the subject of real estate. "I saw a listing today," he mentioned casually, his eyes fixed on his phone. "A house, not too far from here. 3 bedrooms, a garden. It's perfect for us." His tone was light, but the implication was heavy with expectation. I paused, a stir of apprehension in my gut. "James, we've talked about this. I'm happy here. We don't need a big house." He looked up, surprise etching his features. "But why settle for this when we can afford so much more? It's about time we lived like we deserve." His words struck a nerve. It wasn't just the presumption of we when he really meant my money, but also his sudden entitlement to a lifestyle he had never contributed to building. Over the following weeks, these conversations became more frequent. James started to bring up luxury cars, expensive vacations, and even investment opportunities. Each suggestion was grander than the last, each plan more elaborate, anchored firmly on the financial security he assumed we, or rather, I, possessed. The strain began to manifest in other ways too. Social gatherings, once a source of joy, turned into platforms for James to hint at our upgraded lifestyle. At a friend's birthday party, he openly discussed our future trips to Europe and the type of car we should buy next. Each claim felt like a chip away at the privacy and principles I held dear. This transformation in James's demeanor placed me in an emotional conundrum. Here was the man I loved. The man who had once cherished our simple life together, now morphed into someone who saw my inheritance as a stepping stone to material indulgences. It was as if the man I knew had been replaced by a stranger with a distorted sense of entitlement. As his plans grew more detailed, our discussions turned into disagreements. One night, as we lay in bed, the tension that had been brewing finally boiled over. "James, where is all this coming from?" I asked, my voice a mix of sadness and frustration. "Why has everything changed since we came back from Italy?" He turned to look at me, his expression a blend of defiance and confusion. "Changed? Mary, I'm thinking about our future. Your money could give us the life we've always wanted." "But at what cost?" I countered. "You're planning our life as if my money is ours. But it isn't, James. It's mine, and it comes with responsibilities and decisions that you're not considering." The room went silent, the weight of our words hanging between us. James's face softened, and for a moment, I saw a glimmer of the man I had fallen in love with. "I just want us to have the best," he whispered. "I might have gotten carried away, but it's only because I want to build something great with you." Despite his reassurances, the seed of doubt had been planted. The following days were a testament to the changed dynamics in our relationship. James's approach had altered subtly. Where once there was partnership, there now lay a transactional expectation. It was not just about sharing a life but about leveraging my wealth for a lifestyle that he now deemed essential. The practical implications of this shift were significant. Financial discussions, once rare and collaborative, became fraught with tension. Planning for the future was no longer about our dreams and goals, but about managing expectations and defending boundaries. I never thought I'd have to deal with him. My financial independence, a source of pride and empowerment, had become a battleground. Moreover, this shift affected how I viewed our relationship's foundation. Trust and respect, once given freely and reciprocally, now required constant negotiation and reassurance. The egalitarian nature of our partnership, which had been one of its strengths, was compromised. I found myself second-guessing not just decisions about money but the motivations behind James's affections and plans. This evolving dynamic also brought with it an emotional toll. There were moments of profound loneliness, times when I felt misunderstood and cornered. The joy that had once colored our daily life together was now occasionally marred by a palpable tension, making our interactions stilted, our conversations careful. In moments of solitude, I questioned the sustainability of our relationship. Could love endure when it was shadowed by financial imbalance and expectations? Was there a way to reclaim the simplicity and sincerity that had once defined us? These were questions that lingered in the quiet corners of our home, unanswered but increasingly urgent. As days turned into weeks, a palpable tension built between us. The air was thick with things unsaid and wishes unexpressed. It was late one evening, as we sat side by side on our couch with the TV chattering idly in the background, that the facade of normalcy finally cracked. "Mary, why don't we consider moving? Somewhere bigger, maybe even start looking at houses?" James ventured cautiously, his voice tinged with a hesitancy that was unlike him. I turned to look at him, really look at him, and saw not just the man I loved but also the growing divide between us. "James, why would we do that? This place. It's enough for us, isn't it? Hasn't it always been?" He shifted uncomfortably, avoiding my gaze. "Well, yes. But don't you think we deserve a bit more? I mean, your family lives so differently. Aren't you ever tempted?" The question hung between us, dense and daunting. I sighed deeply, feeling the weight of the moment pressing down on us. "James, I grew up around all that excess. And yes, it's beautiful. But it's not what makes me happy. I've chosen this life with you because it's what feels right for me. Not because I can't afford any differently." "But it's not about what we can afford, Mary," he countered, his voice rising slightly in frustration. "It's about what you can afford, and honestly, isn't it a bit wasteful not to use it?" His words stung, the implication clear and cutting. I felt a coldness seep into the space between us, chilling the warmth we had cultivated over our years together. "Is that how you see it, James? My family's money is a resource for us to tap into whenever we feel like it? Because that's not how I view it. That money, it comes with strings, with expectations and responsibilities that you don't understand." James looked taken aback, his expression softening. "I didn't mean it like that, Mary. I just thought..." "What? That suddenly because my family has money, our plans, our dreams should change?" My voice was sharper than I intended, edged with a bitterness that tasted foreign on my tongue. He paused, the air thick with our unsaid thoughts, before he reached for my hand, his touch tentative. "I'm sorry, Mary. I suppose I got carried away. It's just all so new to me. I never thought I'd be close to someone with so much possibility." I pulled my hand gently from his grasp, needing the space to gather my thoughts. "James, my family's wealth isn't what I want our life to be about. I love our life, our home, just as it is. I don't want that to change because of money." He nodded slowly, his eyes meeting mine with a sincerity that punctured the tension. "I understand. Or at least I'll try to. I love you, Mary. I love this life we've built. I don't want to lose it over fantasies of something that might not even make us happy." It was then I realized how deeply entangled our dreams had become with the reality of my heritage. We sat together, the distance between us filled with the echo of our words, slowly finding our way back to each other. "I'm sorry for pushing," James murmured after a long silence, his voice low. "I'll respect your feelings about this. We can go as slow as you need. Let's just keep living our life, our way." I nodded, feeling a fragile peace settle over us. It was a temporary resolution, a band-aid over a wound that needed more than just promises to heal. But it was a start, a recognition of our mutual desire to preserve what we had, even in the face of tempting possibilities. As we turned back to the flickering light of the TV, a small smile passed between us, a silent acknowledgement of the complexities of love and wealth, and the simple truth that sometimes, holding on to what you value most requires letting go of what the world tells you should matter. Update. The weeks following our muted confrontation were a study in fragile normalcy. James and I navigated our days with a cautious tenderness, each of us aware of the unspoken fissures slowly spreading beneath the surface of our relationship. I believed, perhaps naively, that we could mend what had been strained by the revelations of wealth and differing desires. But the real test of our bond was yet to come. A test that would shatter the tentative peace we had brokered. The betrayal came on an unexpectedly warm evening, at a gathering hosted by a close friend. It was the kind of casual event we had attended countless times before, a backyard barbecue, where the smell of grilling mixed with laughter and music floated on the late summer air. James and I arrived together, hands linked, our smiles a bit too practiced, too ready. As the evening progressed, I noticed James slipping more comfortably into the crowd, his laughter a little louder, his gestures more expansive with every drink he consumed. I mingled too, but with a mind distracted by the watchful maintenance of my facade. It wasn't until I was by the makeshift bar, fetching us another round of drinks, that I overheard it. "No, you don't understand. Mary can afford way more than this. Her family is loaded. She's basically set for life," James was boasting, the words floating over to me, sharp and clear above the hum of party chatter. Frozen, drink in hand, my heart raced as I processed his words. A group of acquaintances around him laughed, someone whistling low in admiration. "Seriously man, that's wild. And here you are living in that tiny place?" Another voice chimed in, half joking, half serious. I felt the air leave my lungs in a whoosh, my presence at the bar suddenly suffocating. The casual betrayal, the ease with which James shared my most guarded secret, the very essence of my fears, was laid bare in those few flippant words. Navigating my way back to him, the cold grip of dread tightening around my heart, I intercepted his boisterous storytelling. "James, can I speak with you? In private?" My voice was calm, but it carried an edge, a signal not lost on him. His face changed as he followed me to a quiet corner of the yard, the mirth fading, replaced by a dawning realization of the gravity of his mistake. "Mary, Did you think it was your news to share?" I interrupted, the hurt making my words sharper, colder. "Did you think it wouldn't matter to me?" he stammered, a mix of alcohol and genuine remorse muddling his words. "I'm sorry. I didn't think it would be a big deal. I got carried away, and you decided my privacy, my trust wasn't worth respecting." I could hear the bitter disappointment in my own voice, a sound I never wanted to direct at him. "Mary, I made a mistake. Please, let's just go home and talk about this," he pleaded, reaching for my arm. I pulled away, my decision crystallizing with stark clarity. "No, James, we can't just talk it away this time. This isn't just a mistake. It's a betrayal." The rest of the evening was a blur of hushed apologies and quiet exits. We left separately, the ride home a solitary journey for each of us, filled with the echoing words of what had passed between us. That night, alone in the apartment we had shared, the walls seemed to close in on me. Each shared memory now tinged with the stain of betrayal. The breakup was as inevitable as the dawn. When James returned the next morning, his eyes hopeful yet wary, I knew what needed to be said. "I can't do this, James. Your actions last night showed me just how little you respect what I hold dear." "But Mary, everyone makes mistakes. I know I messed up, but I can fix this." "We can fix this," he insisted, desperation lacing his voice. "This wasn't just a slip, James. It was a choice. You chose to share something deeply personal about me, not out of love or necessity, but for entertainment. I can't build a life with someone who values their momentary status over our trust." His protests faded as the finality of my words settled between us. The breakup, though unilateral in declaration, was mutual in its necessity. We parted with a heavy silence, the kind that speaks louder than any words of farewell. In the days that followed, the fallout was both personal and social. Mutual friends, caught between allegiances, offered awkward condolences or curious probes masked as concern. I found solace in solitude, turning to my passion for painting, letting the colors express the turmoil that words could not. Each brushstroke was a step towards healing, a way to reclaim the peace that had been disrupted. The betrayal had not just ended a relationship, it had forced me to confront the vulnerabilities I had tried so hard to shield. But in that confrontation, there was growth. I learned that my values were not just preferences but necessities, the core of who I was and who I would continue to be, with or without someone by my side. As I painted, the hues blending on the canvas, I realized that this ending was not just an end, but a beginning. A chance to redefine my boundaries, to strengthen my resolve, and to ensure that my next chapter would be one where trust was not just given, but earned. The days after the party were a haze of conflicting emotions. I vacillated between anger and sadness, betrayal and a strange sense of liberation. The realization that James had so casually disclosed my family's wealth to people who had no business knowing gnawed at me. It wasn't just the fact that he had spoken out of turn, it was the casual disregard for my feelings, the thoughtlessness of his actions. Each time I replayed the scene in my head, my resolve hardened. I couldn't continue a relationship where such fundamental trust was so easily broken. I needed time to think, to process the gravity of what had happened. I spent hours walking through the city, the familiar streets providing a backdrop for my swirling thoughts. By the end of the third day, I knew what I had to do. When James returned home, he looked hopeful, as if expecting that time had softened my stance. I asked him to sit with me, our small living room suddenly feeling too large, too empty. "James, we need to talk," I began, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. He nodded, his eyes searching mine for a hint of reconciliation. "I know, Mary, I'm really sorry about what happened. I was drunk and stupid, but I didn't mean to hurt you." "I know you didn't mean to," I said, trying to keep my tone even. "But you did hurt me, deeply. What you did wasn't just a mistake. It was a breach of trust, something that's fundamental to any relationship." He looked down, the weight of my words settling in. "I understand that. And I promise it won't happen again. I'll do anything to make it right." I took a deep breath, bracing myself for the hardest part. "James, this isn't just about making it right. It's about the fact that you saw my family's wealth and it changed something in you. You started seeing my money as ours, and that's not what I want for my life." He looked up, a hint of desperation in his eyes. "So what are you saying? You want to end things over this?" "I'm saying that our relationship has been fundamentally altered by what's happened. I can't ignore that. I can't go back to the way things were because that trust is broken. And without trust, we have nothing." The silence that followed was heavy, each second stretching painfully. Finally, James nodded, his expression one of resigned sadness. "If that's what you really want, then I'll respect it. I'm truly sorry, Mary." I felt a tear escape, quickly wiping it away. "I know you are. And I'm sorry too. This isn't what I wanted, but it's what I need to do for myself." The days that followed were a blur of muted interactions and strained conversations. Friends who had been at the party reached out, some with genuine concern, others with a curiosity that felt invasive. I found myself navigating a delicate balance, explaining the situation without divulging too much, trying to protect my privacy even in the wake of its breach. Some friends were supportive, offering their shoulders to cry on and their ears to listen. Others seemed more interested in the gossip, their questions probing for details that felt too raw to share. It was a lonely time, despite the well-meaning gestures, as I struggled to find a way forward. I threw myself into my work, finding solace in the routine and the familiar tasks that required my full attention. Painting became my refuge. The act of creating something new. A therapeutic process that helped me process my emotions. Each stroke of the brush was a way to channel the pain, the disappointment, the anger. The canvas became a mirror of my inner turmoil, and as the days passed, the chaotic swirls of color slowly began to take form, reflecting my journey towards healing. I also started journaling, pouring my thoughts onto the pages, unfiltered and raw. It was a way to make sense of the tangled web of emotions, to understand the why and the how of what had happened. Writing became a nightly ritual, a time for reflection and self-discovery. Through these creative outlets, I began to reclaim my sense of self. The betrayal had left scars, but it also taught me valuable lessons about trust, boundaries, and the importance of protecting what mattered most to me. I emerged from the experience stronger, more resolute, and more determined to live a life defined by my values, not by the expectations or judgments of others. As time passed, the initial sting of the betrayal faded, replaced by a quieter, more profound understanding of what I needed in a relationship. I knew that the next time I opened my heart to someone, it would be with a clearer sense of my own worth and a firmer grip on the boundaries that protected my peace. In the end, the breakup was not just an end but a beginning. It marked the start of a new chapter in my life, one where I was more attuned to my own needs and more protective of my own happiness. It was a hard-won lesson, but one that I carried with me as I moved forward, ready to face whatever came next with a renewed sense of purpose and strength. On our wedding night, I discovered a shocking truth about my husband. He needed his mother's presence during our first night together. My name is Jenny, and I'm 26 years old. Our wedding day was, quite simply, everything I had ever dreamed it would be. As Alex and I stood hand in hand under the archway of blooming roses, our vows echoed softly under the vast blue sky. Our friends and family, gathered in a beautifully decorated garden, watched with teary eyes and broad smiles as we promised to love and cherish each other. The air was filled with the scent of summer flowers, the sounds of laughter, and the gentle strains of violin that seemed to weave magic into the atmosphere. It was a day marked by joy, a celebration of love in its purest form, encapsulating the promise of a new beginning. As Alex and I planned our wedding, the usual joys and stresses of preparing for such a grand day were accompanied by the subtle shadows of Alex's past. Hints of his old hidden scars began to emerge amidst conversations about table settings and guest lists. There were fleeting moments when his eyes would cloud over, or he'd fall silent, seemingly gripped by a memory only he could see. I noticed these instances, the small cracks in his otherwise sturdy facade. My heart ached to know what weighed on him, but I respected his privacy fiercely. Alex was a man who valued his inner sanctum, and I loved him all the more for his complexities. So, I did not press, choosing instead to focus on our love and the excitement of starting our new life together. In the whirl of wedding preparations, my relationship with Mrs. Green, Alex's mother, took on a life of its own. From the outset, she was more than just a future mother-in-law. She was a presence of warmth and understanding, a comforting anchor in the sometimes overwhelming sea of wedding decisions. Her intuition about people was uncanny, and her ability to navigate Alex's moods proved invaluable, especially as the wedding drew closer and his episodes of withdrawal became more frequent. One chilly afternoon, as we pored over old family photo albums searching for inspiration for our wedding slideshow, Mrs. Green shared stories of Alex as a boy, his mischievous smile, his boundless energy, and also, his quiet moments. She spoke with a nostalgic smile, but her eyes betrayed a hint of sadness, a mother's concern that had weathered many unseen storms. It was during these intimate gatherings that I began to understand the depth of their bond, and how deeply the threads of past traumas were woven into the fabric of Alex's current being. Her role in our lives became even more pronounced as she helped me navigate through the complexities of bonding with a man whose heart had been scarred at such a young age. She had an exquisite tact in guiding me on how to be there for Alex, never overstepping, yet always providing just enough insight to help me connect with him on a deeper level. This delicate balance of distance and closeness in her advice helped me respect Alex's pace without feeling shut out. When it came time to choose gifts for Alex, be it his birthday or Christmas, Mrs. Green proved an indispensable ally. She had an exceptional knack for knowing exactly what would touch Alex's heart. Each gift we selected was not just a material item but a symbol, a message in a bottle sent into the depths of his heart, affirming love, understanding, and acceptance. Shopping trips with Mrs. Green for these gifts became our little tradition, times filled with laughter and shared secrets, weaving me deeper into the family tapestry. The most memorable moment came a few weeks before the wedding. After a long day spent finalizing seating arrangements and menu choices, Mrs. Green invited me for tea at her house. The house was quiet, a soft classical melody playing in the background, lending an air of serenity to the room. We sat in her sun-drenched living room, surrounded by plants that thrived under her careful attention, mirroring the nurturing nature of her personality. With a gentle, almost reverential tone, Mrs. Green said she had something special for me. From an old ornately carved wooden box, she pulled out a small velvet case. Inside was a ring, a beautiful antique piece that had belonged to Alex's great-grandmother. The ring was delicate, its band worn thin by time, its stone still catching the light with a fiery sparkle. As she placed it in my hand, her fingers lingered over mine, her touch conveying layers of meaning. "This ring," she began, her voice soft but clear, "is more than just a family heirloom. It is a symbol of our acceptance and trust in you, Jenny. It's a welcome into our family. A family that, like this ring, has weathered many storms and survived. It is a testament not just to the past, but to the future we hope to build with you in it." The weight of the ring in my palm felt monumental, as if the small circle of metal encapsulated more than just familial history. It was a binding promise, a token of faith. The ring, with its intricate engravings and warm golden hue, symbolized the merging of past and future, of memories and hopes. As I slipped it onto my finger, it felt like a shield, imbued with the strength and love of the women who had worn it before me. Tears welled up in my eyes as I looked up at Mrs. Green, overwhelmed by the depth of her gesture. Her eyes met mine, mirroring my emotions. At that moment, I understood the sacredness of what she had given me. It was an affirmation of my place beside Alex, an endorsement of my role not just as his wife, but as a daughter to her. "Thank you," I managed to say, my voice thick with emotion. "I promise to honor the love and trust you've placed in me." She nodded, her smile tender. "I know you will, my dear. You already have." On the morning of our wedding, the early sun painted the sky with strokes of pink and orange, promising a day as radiant as the love Alex and I shared. The gentle breeze whispered through the leaves, carrying with it the soft, melodious chirps of morning birds. As I awoke, a flutter of excitement danced in my stomach, and a smile spread across my face, the kind that comes from deep within, knowing that today, I would marry the man I loved. The venue was nestled on the edge of a lush, sprawling garden that bloomed with life, each petal and leaf vibrant under the warm glow of the sun. It was here, among the weaving paths and fragrant blooms, that we had chosen to bind our lives together. The garden was more than just a venue, it was a reflection of our relationship, natural, blooming, and beautifully wild. As the morning progressed, the air filled with the sounds of preparation. The clinking of dishes, the soft rustling of floral arrangements being perfected, and the gentle directives of the wedding planner created a symphony of anticipation. Each vendor moved with a purpose, their expertise turning our vision into reality. The tables were set with fine linen, each piece of cutlery placed with precision. Centerpieces of wildflowers and greenery adorned the tables, their colors popping against the crisp white tablecloths. The ceremony area was set in a quiet corner of the garden, under a large oak tree whose branches stretched out as if to embrace the gathering. Beneath its sturdy boughs, a simple wooden arch stood decorated with white and soft pink roses, intertwined with ivy and sprigs of lavender. The chairs for our guests were arranged in a gentle arc, each one adorned with a small bouquet of flowers tied with a ribbon, fluttering lightly in the breeze. Guests began to arrive, their faces bright with joy and attire colorful, adding to the festive atmosphere. The hum of their greetings and laughter blended into the background music, a carefully chosen playlist of soft romantic tunes that Alex and I had spent nights curating. Each song held a memory, a piece of our journey, and now they played for all to hear, setting the stage for the promises we were about to make. As the time drew near, my heart began to beat a little faster, the reality of the moment settling in. Accompanied by my father, I took a deep breath and stepped into the hidden pathway that would lead me to the archway. The sight that greeted me took my breath away. There, waiting for me, was Alex. He stood tall and sure, his suit tailored perfectly to him, complementing his form. His hair was styled neatly, and his face held an expression of awe and tenderness as he watched me approach. The walk down the aisle felt like a lifetime and a moment all at once. With each step, I moved closer not just to Alex, but to the new life we would build together. The eyes of our loved ones followed me, but all I could see was him. As I reached his side, his hand reached out for mine, a silent promise of support and love that sent warmth spreading through me. The ceremony was a heartfelt exchange of vows that we had written ourselves. Alex's voice was steady but filled with emotion as he spoke his vows. His words painted a picture of our past and a promise of our future, each sentence carefully chosen to convey his love and commitment. My vows echoed his in sentiment, spoken through tears of happiness that streamed freely down my cheeks. There was laughter too, as we interjected little anecdotes of our life together, making the ceremony deeply personal and joyously authentic. As we exchanged rings, the symbol of our endless love and the seal of our vows, the oak tree above us seemed to stand a little taller, its leaves rustling as if in applause. The kiss that followed was both a seal of our promises and a celebration, met with cheers and clapping from our guests. The reception that followed was a blur of dancing, eating, and heartfelt speeches. The first dance was to a song that had seen us through our hardest times, its lyrics now a testament to the strength of our bond. As Alex spun me around the dance floor, the world fell away, leaving only the sound of the music and the feeling of being completely, utterly loved. Our families and friends made speeches that brought both roars of laughter and tender tears. Each word spoken was a thread added to the tapestry of our day, weaving a memory that would hold strong in the years to come. The food was exquisite, each bite a burst of flavor, a celebration of our day. The cake, a simple yet elegant design of white frosting and flowers, was cut amidst cheers, its sweetness a perfect metaphor for the life awaiting us. As the day transitioned into evening, the lights dimmed to a golden hue, casting shadows that danced along with the guests. Alex and I moved among our loved ones, our hearts brimming with happiness. Every moment felt suspended in time, from the heartfelt speeches that brought tears to our eyes to our first dance, where we swayed to a melody that spoke only to our souls. The world around us blurred into a background of sparkling lights and soft music, with the only focus being the profound connection between us. Yet, as the night wore on and the last of the guests bid their farewells, a subtle shift occurred. The exhaustion from the day's emotions and festivities began to settle in, and with it came a thickness in the air, as if it were laden with unspoken truths. I sensed it most acutely when we finally retreated to our room, the sanctuary where we had planned to end our perfect day. But instead of the comforting silence I had anticipated, there was a palpable tension, a stirring of something deep and unnerving that I couldn't quite identify. Alex, who had been the bastion of strength throughout our relationship, seemed suddenly distant, his usual calm demeanor replaced by a nervous energy that thrummed quietly beneath his skin. I had always known there were aspects of his past that shadowed his bright smile, hints of dark chapters he had never fully disclosed. Our relationship had been built on a foundation of deep mutual respect and understanding, and I had learned to navigate the delicate balance between his openness and the secrets he guarded so closely. I respected his privacy, never pushing for more than he was willing to share. Understanding that some wounds were deeply ingrained, etched into one's soul by experiences too painful to relive. The unexpected knock at our door came just as I was about to speak, to breach the subject that hung heavily between us. It was Mrs. Green, Alex's mother, her presence on the threshold of our bridal suite as surprising as it was alarming. The sight of my husband whispering urgently with his mother in the dimly lit corridor was something I had not anticipated on our wedding night. The warmth and guidance Mrs. Green had always extended to me felt suddenly invasive. Her timing inexplicable. "Mom. I can't come. Can you come in?" Alex's voice, barely a whisper, carried a weight I had never heard before. His words, though softly spoken, seemed to fill the room, making the walls close in around us. My heart raced with a mixture of confusion and concern, questions forming faster than I could voice them. As they stepped into our room, the space that had once felt like a haven now seemed too small, the air too thick, as if filled with the dense fog of impending revelations. Mrs. Green's presence, although always a source of comfort in the past, now marked a moment of intrusion, an unexpected interruption in what should have been a private celebration of our union. Yet the look in her eyes, one of deep empathy mixed with a mother's protective instinct, prompted me to pause, to reassess the situation that was unfolding before me. It was clear that this was not just a breach of newlywed privacy. It was a necessary intervention, a moment that Alex needed more than I had realized. Mrs. Green's eyes flicked between Alex and me, her face etched with a mixture of apology and urgency. It was clear that this was not a mere intrusion, but a necessity born of something deeper, something distressing. Alex, usually so composed, looked visibly shaken, his eyes pleading for understanding. "What's happening?" I managed to ask, my voice barely above a whisper. The air felt thick with unspoken truths, the kind that could alter the course of a relationship forever. There was a palpable pause, heavy with hesitation. Mrs. Green glanced at Alex, who seemed momentarily lost for words, his gaze fixed on the floor. Then, gathering her resolve, she looked directly at me, her voice steady but soft. "Jenny, there's something about Alex's past that you need to know, something he might have struggled to tell you himself." Her words were gentle, but they cut through the silence with the sharpness of glass. After a brief moment of silence, during which Mrs. Green seemed to calculate her answer, she turned to her son with wide eyes. "Wait. You told her about—" Alex shook his head. "Go ahead. What were you thinking? The poor thing must think we're a couple of weirdos." Alex looked deep into my eyes before he sighed and began to reveal his biggest secret. "When I was just 5 years old, the unthinkable happened. A burglar broke the peace of our home by breaking in through my bedroom window. That night, under the cover of darkness, my world changed forever. The intruder's silhouette, the menacing presence in my sanctuary left me frozen in terror. I could not cry out or escape, and the result of the breach was a deep, all-pervading fear that clung to me long after the broken glass had been swept away and the window secured. In the following nights, my bedroom felt like a battlefield, every shadow a reminder of my vulnerability. Sleep, once a refuge, became an insurmountable challenge. But in the midst of my fear, my mother became my guardian angel. Night after night she sat by my bedside, her presence a beacon of safety in the dark. With the gentle timbre of her voice, she spun stories of courage and adventure, of heroes who faced their fears and emerged victorious. These bedtime stories, more than just stories, became our ritual, a shared journey back to a sense of normalcy and safety. My mother's steadfast patience and love taught me that there is a source of strength despite crippling fear. Within us a resilience that can be nurtured and nurtured. Since that terrifying night, my mother has been my steadfast companion in my search for peace as I fall asleep, her presence reminding me that even in our darkest moments we are not alone. The revelation of Alex's childhood trauma had left the room steeped in a solemn air, charged with the rawness of newly shared pain. As Alex's secret unfolded, my initial reaction was one of shock, the kind that sends a chill through your very core, not just because of the horror of what he endured, but because of the profound depth of his hidden scars. My hands trembled slightly as the reality settled over me. This man I loved, so strong and composed, had carried this heavy shadow alone for so long. The weight of his past, a burden he had borne in solitude, now lay between us, but not as a barrier. Instead, it bridged our hearts with a newfound understanding. I felt a deep ache for him, the child who had faced such terror, and the man who had grown up shadowed by fear. But within that ache was a blooming determination, a resolve to be the support he needed, the partner he deserved. Alex looked into my eyes, vulnerability written across his face, and asked a simple question that encompassed so much. "So, how can I help you?" His words, meant to be comforting, only underscored the role reversal we were experiencing. Here he was, still trying to be the protector, the provider, even in his moment of disclosure. "It's not about how you can help me, but how I can help you," I replied gently, taking his hand in mine. The contact was a small physical reassurance that I was there, fully present and ready to face this battle alongside him. Mrs. Green, who had been a silent pillar of strength up until now, spoke up, her voice calm and soothing, providing the guidance I needed. Whenever Alex feels anxious or overwhelmed, especially at night, specific cuddling has always helped to calm him down, she explained. Hold him close, with his head resting on your heart. It's a method that has soothed him since childhood. I nodded, absorbing her advice with the seriousness it deserved. Although he has largely outgrown the need for this, his anxiety can still overwhelm him in stressful times, she continued. It is important to be patient and understanding, and offer him physical reassurance. This approach has often been the key to helping him find peace and sleep. Armed with this new knowledge, I turned to Alex, inviting him into an embrace that I hoped would offer not just comfort, but also a sanctuary from his anxieties. He hesitated for a brief moment, then allowed himself to be held. As he laid his head upon my chest, I could feel his body tensed like a bowstring, the muscles tight with the effort of maintaining his composure. Gradually, as we remained locked in that embrace, I felt the tension begin to ebb from his body, his breathing slowing to match the steady beat of my heart. The room, filled with the echoes of our wedding celebrations just hours before, now resonated with a quieter, deeper connection. Every heartbeat seemed to whisper reassurance, a rhythmic reminder that he was safe, that he was not alone. In that moment, as I held Alex, the significance of what we were doing dawned on me. This was not just about providing comfort in a time of need, it was a profound act of sharing and healing. We were rewriting the narratives of his past fears with a new story, one of trust, support, and unconditional love. As Alex's breaths deepened and evened out, signaling his drift into sleep, the weight of his worries seemed to dissipate, lifting not only from his shoulders but from the air around us. I felt a protective surge, a fierce desire to shield him from any further pain, and a commitment to be the partner he could lean on whenever the shadows of his past loomed too large. Mrs. Green, having observed the transformation from the sidelines, gave a silent nod of approval and gratitude before quietly leaving the room. Her departure was discreet, a respectful acknowledgement of the new intimacy Alex and I were forging. Her expression as she left was one of peace, a mother's relief palpable in her eyes, knowing her son was in caring hands. The impact of that night lingered long after Alex had fallen asleep and the first light of dawn crept into our room. Lying awake, I reflected on the journey ahead. It would require patience, empathy, and an openness to understand and soothe the scars of a trauma I had never experienced. But more than anything, I felt ready to be the partner Alex needed, to walk alongside him as we navigated the complexities of his healing together. The vulnerability he showed and my response to it did not weaken our bond. Instead, it fortified it. We were no longer just husband and wife. We were partners in a journey of healing and understanding. Each day as we navigated his anxieties and fears together, our connection deepened, transforming from romantic love into something far more profound, a sanctuary, a safe haven where we could be our truest selves without fear of judgment. This tender, pivotal night marked not just the beginning of our marriage but the deepening of our bond, a testament to the power of shared vulnerabilities and mutual support. It underscored a fundamental truth about love, that it is at its most potent not in the easy, joyful moments, but in the quiet, challenging ones where we choose to stand together, facing the hidden battles with resilience and hope. As dawn broke over the horizon, painting the sky with hues of new beginnings, I knew that together, we were stronger, and together, we would heal. This experience taught us that love is not just about sharing joy and happiness, but also about bearing witness to each other's deepest fears, and standing steadfast in the face of personal demons. It's about building a life where each person feels supported and understood, a foundation so strong that even the darkest past could not destabilize it. Our story, though rooted in pain and vulnerability, is ultimately one of triumph, of love's power to heal and transform. It serves as a testament to the fact that the most profound intimacy comes from baring one's soul and being met with compassion and unwavering support. As Alex and I continue to grow together, we cherish the lessons learned from that night, a night that began with uncertainty but ended with the reassuring understanding that together, we are invincible. This narrative of our first night as a married couple encapsulates the essence of our ongoing journey, a narrative of confronting shadows, fostering understanding, and celebrating the resilient, healing power of love. My dad turned to drink and criticized Mom after her brother cheated us, causing us to lose land. I am Mary, a sophomore in college, and my life today feels like a shadow of what it once was. Just a few years ago, my family embodied the warmth and joy that I believed would always define us. My father, a robust man with an infectious laugh, was the kind of dad who would spend hours in the garden, teaching me and my younger brother, Alex, the names of all the flowers and how to take care of them. My mother, a gentle soul with eyes that seemed to hold endless kindness, made our small cozy house a home with her loving touch and the heavenly smell of her cooking. Back then the future seemed bright. Our little family was tight-knit, bound by love and shared dreams, especially after my parents managed to buy a hectare of land from my uncle, my mother's brother. That land was more than just soil and greenery, it represented a legacy, a future where our family could build and grow, both literally and metaphorically. We envisioned a small family farm, maybe a few rental cottages that could nestle in the shade of the large oak trees dotting the landscape. It was a symbol of stability and hope, a tangible piece of prosperity that promised to anchor our family for generations. My Uncle James, my mother's younger brother, had always been a charismatic and persuasive figure. Growing up, I saw him as a fun-loving uncle who seemed to breeze through life, always with a ready joke or a small gift for me and Alex. He was a frequent visitor in our home, his arrival often heralding impromptu barbecues and late-night storytelling sessions. My mother adored him. She often spoke of their childhood adventures with a fondness and nostalgia that painted my uncle as not just a sibling but a hero in her eyes. This deep familial bond made him more than just an uncle to us. He was an integral part of our family fabric. My parents, especially my mother, trusted him implicitly. This trust was rooted in decades of shared history and mutual support. When Uncle James spoke, his words carried the weight of sincerity. Or so we believed. In hindsight, the signs of his financial instability were there, but they were subtle, overshadowed by his charm and our trust. He mentioned struggles now and then, hints about the economy, bad investments, the rising costs of living, but they were always presented as temporary setbacks. Nothing a good next move couldn't fix. So when Uncle James offered to sell a hectare of his land to my parents in 2013, it seemed like a golden opportunity. The land was located on the outskirts of our town, a lush expanse of green that bordered a small forest. My parents had always dreamed of owning more land, perhaps starting a small organic farm or building a few holiday cottages to rent out. The land my uncle offered seemed perfect for such dreams. The deal was straightforward, or so it seemed. Uncle James explained that he was selling the land because he needed liquidity to fund my cousin's college education. He painted a vivid picture. The land, once developed, could be the foundation of our family's financial security. My parents, eager to invest in our future and to help my uncle, agreed to buy it. The price was reasonable, the terms favorable, and the paperwork appeared to be in order, except for one detail. The Red Book, the official document proving land ownership, was still under the bank's hold due to a small loan my uncle had taken out. With reassurances from Uncle James that the loan would be cleared within a year, my parents proceeded. He crafted a promissory note, a casual yet seemingly earnest document, wherein he vowed to clear the debt and transfer the Red Book to my parents as soon as possible. Trusting him, they paid him the money, believing that the formalities were just a formality. Months turned into a year, and the promised Red Book did not materialize. My parents grew anxious, but each inquiry was met with reassurances and new promises from Uncle James. He always had a reason for the delay: paperwork snafus, bank errors, bureaucratic red tape. But his charm and our family's trust in him kept my parents from pressing too hard. This pattern continued until late 2018. That was when everything changed. The financial bubble that Uncle James had been inflating burst with shocking consequences. It turned out that the initial loan against the land was just the tip of an iceberg. Uncle James had been drowning in debt, far more than he had disclosed. In a desperate move, he had taken out further loans against the land, each one a deeper cut into the trust my parents had placed in him. The final blow came abruptly. Uncle James declared bankruptcy, and within weeks, we learned that he had fled the country. The news was delivered by a bank representative who arrived one crisp autumn morning to place foreclosure signs around the hectare that we thought was ours. The bank explained that the land was heavily mortgaged, far beyond its worth, and would be seized to cover my uncle's debts. The revelation shattered my parents. The betrayal by someone they had trusted so deeply was a wound that went beyond financial loss. My father particularly felt deceived and humiliated. He had advocated for the deal, swayed by my mother's trust in her brother and by the dreams they had harbored for that piece of land. The loss was not just a plot of earth, it was a future they had envisioned and promised to us. As the legal realities settled in, so did the bitterness. My father's sense of betrayal morphed into a festering anger that found its easiest outlet in my mother, who, despite being a victim herself, bore the brunt of his accusations and grief. The man who had once been the life of our family gatherings was now a source of tension and despair. In this new harsh light, every memory of Uncle James was recast. The laughter and gifts, once signs of his generosity, now seemed part of a facade that hid his deceit. His stories, once enchanting, now felt like manipulations. The trust that had once bound our family to him had turned into a chain that dragged us down into a mire of betrayal and regret. The descent into despair was gradual at first, like the slow setting of the sun before darkness fully takes hold. My father, once a pillar of strength and joy in our household, succumbed to the weight of his disillusionment. His days began and ended with the bitter tang of alcohol, the bottles accumulating like silent markers of his decline. He no longer tended to his business, a small landscaping company that had flourished due to his love for nature and his dedication to his craft. Instead, he let calls go unanswered, projects unfinished, and slowly, the vibrant man who had raised me with laughter and lessons in resilience, succumbed to a listless apathy. It was not just the loss of the land that broke him, but the betrayal by his own brother-in-law, and the crushing responsibility of having convinced my mother to trust her brother. In his eyes, his failure was twofold. Not only had he failed to protect our financial future, but he had also placed his faith in a man who destroyed us. This sense of failure consumed him, leading him to relinquish all his hard work as if in surrender to an unseen foe. He wandered through his days like a ghost, his presence marked more by the trail of empty bottles than by any interaction with us. My mother bore the brunt of this transformation. The sharp edge of my father's tongue turned against her in his darkest moments. He accused her of complicity, of knowing her brother's intentions and yet leading us into ruin. His words were like daggers, and they sliced through the fabric of her self-worth every day. "Your family is a bunch of scammers," he would shout, the alcohol fueling his anger, turning it into a wildfire that consumed any remnants of peace within our home. Despite the onslaught, my mother's resilience was something to behold. She absorbed the verbal blows with a kind of stoic grace, her eyes often wet with unshed tears, but her posture remained unbroken. She became the buffer between my father's wrath and the rest of us, especially for Alex, my younger brother, who was just entering his teenage years amidst our family's crisis. Alex's rebellion against the situation was fierce and protective. He could not bear to see our mother demeaned and insulted. His confrontations with our father began as verbal skirmishes, challenging the unfairness of his accusations, defending our mother's honor with a boldness that both scared and awed me. "Stop blaming Mom, she didn't do anything wrong," he would yell back, his young voice cracking under the strain of his emotions. These clashes often escalated until the house felt like a battlefield, the air so thick with tension it was hard to breathe. Witnessing these exchanges tore at me. I was caught in a relentless storm of emotions, anger at my uncle for his deceit, despair over my father's downfall, and a deep gnawing pain for my mother's suffering. Each evening, as I heard my father's slurred accusations and my brother's desperate defenses, I felt a part of my heart crumble. The helplessness was overwhelming. I was a spectator in my own life, watching the people I loved tear each other apart. My mother, amidst this chaos, tried to maintain some semblance of normalcy. She went about her daily routines, cooking meals that none of us had the heart to eat, cleaning a house that no longer felt like a home, and trying, always trying, to mediate between my father and brother. Her efforts were Herculean, and yet, I could see the toll it took on her. The circles under her eyes grew darker each day, her smiles more forced and fleeting. She often pulled me aside, her hands clutching mine with a desperation that was hidden from the others. "Take care of your studies, Mary. Don't worry about us," she would whisper, her voice trembling. But how could I not worry? How could I focus on college applications and exams when home was a place of war? The weight of her suffering became my constant companion. I lay awake at night, listening to the echoes of their arguments, and wondered how much more we could withstand. The fear of the phone ringing with news of something worse kept me on edge, a perpetual anxiety that gnawed at my concentration, my peace. In those moments when the house finally quieted down, I would find my mother in the living room, staring out the window. Sometimes I joined her, sitting in silence as we both lost ourselves in the world outside. It was during one of these silent vigils that she finally broke down and shared her deepest fears. "I'm scared, Mary," she confessed, her voice a whisper. "Scared that he'll never forgive me. Scared of losing you and Alex to this hatred." Her admission shattered the last barriers I had put up to protect myself. I realized then that my role wasn't just to be a bystander. I needed to be her ally, Alex's support, and perhaps, find a way to reach my father. But the path to healing seemed obscured by the thick fog of past mistakes and present pain. Life at home had become a landscape of suspicion and bitterness. My father's distrust had deepened to a point where even the simplest acts of familial kindness were scrutinized and tainted with accusations. My mother's occasional visits to her mother's house, or her attempts to maintain some semblance of connection with her parents through gifts or phone calls, were not spared from my father's critical eye. He saw these gestures not as acts of love but as betrayals, further proof of conspiracies woven in his mind. One chilly afternoon, I returned from school to find the house unusually cold and quiet. My mother sat at the kitchen table, her face weary and lined with fresh worries. She looked up as I entered, managing a weak smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She had been to visit Grandma, who was unwell, and had brought her some homemade soup and a warm blanket. When my father had learned of this, he exploded in rage, accusing her of wasting our scarce resources on her family, whom he now viewed almost as enemies. "Doesn't matter what I do, it's always wrong in his eyes," she confided in me, her voice breaking. "But I can't just stop caring for my mom, Mary. I can't." The situation with the phone calls was even worse. Every ring stirred a palpable tension in the air. My father, often fueled by his drunken stupor, would accuse my mother of conspiring with her brother, my uncle, despite my uncle having disappeared years ago. He couldn't seem to grasp that no one in the family had heard from him since he fled, leaving us to deal with the fallout of his actions. Each call, no matter the caller, seemed to him a ghostly echo of past betrayals, a reminder of the trust that had been broken and the financial security that had been stolen from us. Despite these overwhelming pressures, my mother continued to shoulder the responsibility of not just trying to keep our family together, but also ensuring that my two sisters and I could continue our education. My sisters, both younger than me, were in high school, facing their own battles with the ripple effects of our family's crisis. The cost of education was a constant worry, but my mother was determined that the chaos at home would not derail our futures. Seeing her struggle, I made the decision to take on a part-time job alongside my studies. I was now a freshman at a local community college, having chosen a school close to home to reduce expenses and stay near my family. My days were a blend of classes, studying, and working late shifts at a nearby cafe. Every paycheck I received went partly to help out at home and partly to cover my own educational expenses. This dual role of student and financial contributor was exhausting. There were nights I came home so tired that I could barely make it through dinner before falling asleep over my textbooks. Yet, seeing my mother's quiet gratitude and the way she fought to keep us all moving forward gave me the strength to keep going. She managed our meager finances with a precision and care that was nothing short of heroic, stretching every dollar to cover not just school fees, but the basic necessities of life. Her resilience was our family's unsung melody, a quiet background score that pushed us all to persevere. My mother never complained about her lot, accepting each day's troubles with a resolve that was both heartbreaking and inspiring. Her love for us was an unspoken promise, a commitment that she lived out by enduring the harsh words and the colder silences from my father. My younger sisters, witnessing all this, grew in their own resilience. We became a team, albeit a silent one, finding comfort in shared glances and quiet conversations away from the storms that frequently brewed in our living room. We helped each other with homework, shared responsibilities around the house, and saved little surprises for our mother. Like the time we all chipped in to buy her a new book by her favorite author, hiding it under her pillow to find after a particularly hard day. In these moments, we found our pockets of peace, small oases of normalcy in a desert of chaos. My father's outbursts and suspicions became the storms we learned to weather, building stronger shelters in our bonds with each other. Each challenge, while painful, forged us into more than just siblings and a mother. It made us allies in a struggle that none of us had chosen, but all of us were determined to survive. As I lay in bed each night, listening to the faint sounds of the house settling, I thought about my mother's sacrifices and my father's pain. The journey was far from easy, and many days, the burden of what we were enduring seemed too much to bear. But in the strength of my mother's unwavering love and the shared resolve of my sisters, I found a flicker of hope that perhaps, someday, we might find a way through the darkness, back to a place where love and trust could bloom once more in our family garden. It was a typical Thursday afternoon, the cafe bustling with the usual crowd of students and local professionals grabbing their midday coffee fix. As a waiter, I navigated through the tables with practiced ease, balancing trays filled with steaming beverages and the cafe's signature pastries. The hum of conversations mixed with the clatter of cups created a familiar soundtrack to my shifts. It was amidst this cacophony that I caught a glimpse of something, or rather someone, that froze me in my tracks. From the corner of my eye, I noticed a figure outside the large front window, a silhouette that was hauntingly familiar. The posture, the way he carried himself, it was unmistakably reminiscent of someone I had hoped to forget. My heart skipped a beat as I told myself it couldn't possibly be him. My uncle, the man responsible for so much of my family's misery, had reportedly fled abroad, a cowardly escape from the financial and emotional wreckage he had caused. Surely I was mistaken. But as the figure approached and entered through the cafe's front door, the reality of his identity became undeniable. It was indeed my uncle. The shock of seeing him there, in flesh and blood, after all the rumors of his departure overseas, left me rooted to the spot. Time seemed to slow as he casually strolled up to the counter, oblivious to the storm of emotions his presence had stirred in me. Dressed incongruously in a crisply tailored suit that seemed to mock the ruin he had left behind, He appeared not only unscathed by the ordeal, but prosperous. The fabric of his coat was fine, clearly expensive, with a sheen that caught the light as he moved. His shoes were polished to a mirror shine, and he wore a watch that glinted under the cafe's overhead lights, a stark contrast to the image of a bankrupt fugitive. As he ordered his coffee, chatting amiably with my co-worker, a surge of anger welled up inside me. Here was the man who had betrayed his own sister, my mother, leaving her to shoulder the burden of his deceit. Her life had become a daily struggle to maintain some semblance of normalcy for us, her children, while he seemingly enjoyed the freedom purchased at our expense. My hands trembled slightly as I took in the sight of him, so at ease, so removed from the consequences of his actions. How could he stroll into my workplace, a place just a stone's throw from the school where I studied and worked to support my family because of the financial mess he had created? The unfairness of it all, the injustice, burned through me. I felt profound sorrow for my mother. She had aged visibly in the past few years, each day etching more lines of worry and exhaustion onto her face. Her nights were restless, often spent in tearful worry, her dreams haunted by the fallout of trusting her brother. And here he was, dressed in a suit that likely cost more than what she could spare on groceries in a month. As my uncle took a seat with his coffee, I wrestled with what to do next. Confronting him was my first instinct. To unleash the pent-up frustration, to tell him about the suffering his actions had continued to cause. Yet, as I watched him, a middle-aged man enjoying his coffee, seemingly content with his world, doubt crept in. What could a confrontation realistically achieve? After a few moments of internal debate, I approached his table, my resolve firming with each step. "Uncle James," I said, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. He looked up, his expression one of mild surprise that shifted quickly to recognition. And fleetingly, something that might have been guilt. "Mary," he replied, his tone cautious. "It's been a long time. You've grown." "Yes," I said, the words tasting bitter. "A lot has changed since you left." We talked then, or rather, I spoke while he listened. I told him about the hardships we faced, about my father's decline, and my mother's silent resilience. I spoke of the responsibilities that had fallen onto my shoulders far too early, the dreams that had to be adjusted, and the family fabric that had been torn apart. He offered explanations, some semblance of regret, though whether it was genuine or not, I couldn't say. He spoke of bad luck and worse choices, of his own losses and regrets. But no apology could undo the damage, no words could reclaim the years of pain and hardship his deceit had wrought upon us. The conversation ended with no dramatic resolution, no promises of restitution. He left, and I returned to my duties, the encounter leaving a mix of sadness and catharsis. I hadn't changed anything, not really. But speaking my truth had lightened something within me. The afternoon had taken a turn I could never have anticipated. After meeting with my uncle at the cafe, I returned home filled with a mix of emotions. It felt important to share the encounter with my mother, to relay not just his words but the sheer normalcy with which he had presented himself. My mother listened quietly, her expression somber, absorbing every detail with a heavy heart. As I spoke, her eyes reflected a deep sadness, a well of emotions that seemed too vast and complex for words. She was silent for a long time, the air between us filled with unspoken thoughts and lingering heartache. It was a silence that spoke volumes, resonating with the weight of all we had endured, all that had been broken and lost because of my uncle's actions. Suddenly, the fragile quiet was shattered by a loud, angry voice. My father, who had been out of sight but not out of earshot, stormed into the room. His face was flushed with anger, his eyes alight with the kind of fiery intensity that had become all too familiar. He had overheard everything, and the information acted like fuel on the already burning fire of his resentment. Without a moment's hesitation, he launched into a tirade. The words were harsh and unforgiving, aimed indiscriminately at my mother, my uncle, and all her relatives. He accused them once again of conspiracy and betrayal, his voice rising to a crescendo of fury and frustration. The pain and bitterness he felt towards my uncle were now tangled with a renewed sense of betrayal, knowing that my uncle was back and living seemingly without consequence. In his rage, he turned towards a shelf in our living room, one that held various family dishes and heirlooms, and began to smash them one by one onto the floor. The sound of shattering porcelain filled the room, each crash a hammer blow to the already fragile peace of our household. My mother's face crumpled in despair at the sight, her hands trembling as she covered her mouth to stifle her sobs. I stood frozen for a moment, shocked and scared by the intensity of my father's outburst. The room felt smaller somehow, as if each broken piece of dishware was a fragment of our family's unity, irretrievably damaged. Amidst the chaos I found my voice, albeit shaky, and tried to intervene. "Dad, please stop. This isn't helping anything," I pleaded, my own voice edged with desperation. But my words seemed to fuel his anger further. He turned his wrath towards me, accusing me of siding with traitors, and questioning my loyalty to our family. The accusations were like slaps to the face, harsh and stinging. I struggled to maintain my composure, to stand strong in the face of the storm. My mother, amidst her tears, tried to calm him, reaching out to touch his arm in a plea for peace. But he was beyond consolation, caught up in his own spiral of anger and hurt. The situation escalated until, finally, exhausted and spent, he left the room, leaving behind a trail of emotional and physical wreckage. The aftermath was a heavy silence, the air thick with the scent of dust and broken porcelain. My mother sank into a chair, her body racked with quiet sobs. I moved to her side, wrapping my arms around her in a silent offer of comfort and solidarity. Together, we mourned not just the dishes or even the peace of our afternoon, but something deeper. The loss of what our family had once been, the easy love and trust that had seemed unbreakable. In that moment of shared grief, my thoughts turned anxiously towards my younger brother Alex. Known for his fiery temper and fierce protectiveness of our mother, I prayed he would stay away until the storm had passed. The last thing we needed was for him to come home and confront our father in his current state. The potential for violence was too great, the stakes too high. I didn't want this family conflict to escalate into something even more destructive. As we sat there, my mother and I, in the quiet aftermath, a profound sadness settled over me. It was a sadness for her, for all she had to endure. For my father, lost to his bitterness, and for Alex, who should have been spared from adult conflicts. I felt an overwhelming urge to protect them all, to somehow mend the fractures that had splintered through our family's foundation. But as I held my mother, feeling the tremble of her sobs, I knew that some things were beyond my ability to repair. The damage was done, the scars too deep. All I could do was offer my support, my love, and my presence, and hope that somehow, it would be enough to help us navigate through the wreckage of our shared past into a future that, despite everything, I still hoped could hold some measure of peace and reconciliation. The morning after the turmoil at home, I found myself at the coffee shop, mechanically performing my duties but with my mind elsewhere. The image of my father's wrathful destruction and my mother's silent tears haunted me, playing over in my mind like a nightmarish loop. Despite the busy morning rush, a part of me remained disengaged, distant. It was during this haze of distraction that I noticed a familiar figure through the shop's window. My father was outside, walking back and forth along the street, his eyes scanning the faces of passers-by. Unlike his usual disheveled appearance marked by the telltale signs of his drunken escapades, today he was sober, his movements deliberate. The stark difference in his demeanor piqued my curiosity and concern. It wasn't long before I realized he was probably looking for my uncle, the man who had set off the chain of events that had led our family to this precipice. Compelled by a mix of worry and a desperate need to understand, I asked my manager if I could leave work early. Once outside, I kept a cautious distance, trailing behind my father as he continued his seemingly aimless search. After some time, he stopped at a small convenience store to buy a bottle of water. With the bottle in hand, he walked to a quieter part of the street, away from the bustling crowd. There he squatted down and took a swig of water. It was then that I saw a vulnerability in him that I had never witnessed before, 2 lines of tears streaming down his face. Watching him at that moment, I felt a wave of conflicting emotions. Just the day before, he had been a tempest, a force of anger and destruction. Now, he seemed diminished, broken, crying like a child lost in a world too harsh and unforgiving. The sight of his tears, so raw and exposed, stirred in me a profound sadness. I wondered about the immense burden he must be carrying, the sheer weight of betrayal from a family member he had trusted implicitly. I didn't approach him. Instead, I turned away, allowing him his moment of private sorrow, and started the walk home, my own tears blurring my vision as I grappled with the pain of our fractured family. What had we done to deserve such a fate? The question echoed in my mind, each step towards home heavy with the gravity of our collective heartache. On impulse, I decided to take a detour to my grandmother's house. I needed a respite. A moment to gather strength from someone who might understand the depth of what we were facing. My grandmother welcomed me with her usual warmth, her keen eyes quick to see the distress in mine. As we sat together, I shared the events of the past few days, and in turn, she offered me insights into my father that I had not fully appreciated before. She spoke of the land, the piece of earth that had promised so much hope and potential. For my father, that land was not merely an investment, it was a testament to his dedication to providing for his family, a tangible representation of his love and commitment to our future. He had poured not just his money, but his dreams into that soil, dreams of security and prosperity for my sisters and me. It was supposed to be our legacy, a stable and secure foundation upon which we could build our lives. Your father has always wanted the best for you girls, my grandmother said, her voice tinged with emotion. He saw that land as a way to ensure you all had opportunities he never had. Losing it, especially the way we did, broke him more than you might realize. Her words shed light on the depth of my father's despair. It wasn't just anger or betrayal that fueled his actions. It was a profound sense of loss, not only of the land but of his role as our provider, of his identity as the man of the house. The loss had unmoored him, and what we saw, the rage, the helplessness, was his struggle to grapple with this new reality. As I listened to my grandmother, I felt a renewed sense of empathy for my father. Understanding the magnitude of his hopes and how deeply he felt their collapse helped me see past the fury and the broken dishes. It didn't excuse his actions, but it helped explain them, framing his outbursts as cries of pain rather than expressions of inherent cruelty. In the midst of our family's turmoil, as I watched the strain and sadness inflicted upon us by my uncle's deceit and my father's subsequent unraveling, I often found myself wrestling with conflicting emotions about what paths my mother should take. There were moments, many moments, when I felt that the only solution for her, and perhaps for all of us, was to sever ties with my father. The man who once filled our home with laughter and security had become a source of pain and instability. It seemed logical, perhaps even necessary, for her to consider divorce as a viable path to peace. Yet despite my suggestions and perhaps even pleas, my mother never took that step. For a long time, I couldn't understand her decision. To me, it looked like an endless cycle of suffering. My father's bitterness and accusations, his thunderous outbursts that shattered more than just the physical tranquility of our home. It all seemed like too much for any one person to bear, especially someone as gentle as my mother. But as time wore on, and I witnessed more of the complexities of human emotions and the deep-seated bonds of marriage, I began to grasp the possible layers of her choice. My mother, with her enduring patience and almost unfathomable strength, perhaps saw beyond the surface of my father's wrath. Beneath his stormy veneer and the alcohol-fueled tirades, there was another man. A man she had loved and chosen to share her life with. A man who had once been the anchor of our family. She understood the depth of his despair, not just at the financial ruin that had befallen us, but at the profound sense of betrayal by his own brother-in-law, a man he had trusted implicitly. This betrayal had not just robbed him of a piece of land. It had robbed him of his dreams for our family's future, of his pride in providing for us, and of his mental peace. Understanding this, my mother likely felt that abandoning my father in his darkest hour would only add to the tragedy of our situation. Her commitment then, was not just to the man he had become but to the man he once was and, perhaps, could be again. It was a choice of compassion over condemnation, of hope over despair. As for my uncle, the architect of our misfortune, my feelings were far less forgiving. The more I pondered on the devastation he had caused, the more a part of me wished him ill. It was a dark thought, and it shamed me at times. Wishing death upon another person, especially a family member, was a heavy, terrible thing. But in my lowest moments, it seemed a fitting end for someone who had so selfishly dismantled the happiness of his own relatives for his gain. Uncle James had not just stolen money. He had stolen our security, our joy, and our ability to look towards the future with hope rather than despair. The fact that he continued to live comfortably, seemingly indifferent to the chaos he had left in his wake, fueled a bitter fire within me. I imagined him facing some form of cosmic justice, where he would finally understand the full weight of the pain he had caused. Leaving my grandmother's house, I felt fortified by a mixture of love and sorrow. The road to healing our family would be long and uncertain, but armed with this new understanding, I felt slightly better equipped to face the challenges ahead. My father's tears and the wreckage at home were not just signs of what we had lost, but also markers of where we needed to begin rebuilding. As I approached our house, the sight of it no longer filled me with dread, but with a resolve. We were broken, yes, but not beyond repair. With each step, I was making a silent vow to myself and to my family. I would not let our story end here, not in anger and despair. Somehow, we would find a way through the pain, guided by the understanding and love that still lingered beneath the scars, waiting to be rediscovered and nurtured back to life. My boyfriend provided only superficial care when I was battling uterine cancer. He even scheduled knee surgery to avoid the responsibility of caring for me. My name is Elizabeth Bennett, and I am 51 years old. Life, with all its unexpected turns and twists, has brought me here. Standing at a crossroads in a relationship that has given me 7 years of companionship, but now leaves me questioning what true partnership means, especially in times of crisis. This contemplation of my relationship with James, my boyfriend, comes at a time when my life has been overshadowed by a recent, serious cancer diagnosis. James and I met almost exactly 7 years ago, a chance encounter that neither of us was looking for but seemed destined all the same. I was at a local bookstore, rummaging through shelves looking for a rare edition of Jane Austen's novels, a passion of mine since my teenage years. He was there too, not particularly interested in books but trying to find a thoughtful gift for his sister. Our hands reached for the same prized copy of Pride and Prejudice. Our eyes met, and in that awkward laughter that followed our tussle over the book, something clicked. It wasn't love at first sight, but it was certainly curiosity that wanted to know more. From there, our relationship grew steadily, if somewhat cautiously. We were both coming from the wounds of previous marriages that had left us skeptical of love. James, with his quiet demeanor and a fiercely independent streak, was initially a puzzle I felt compelled to solve. He had a quirky sense of humor and an intellect that challenged and intrigued me. His background in engineering and his penchant for solitary hobbies like woodworking and model building contrasted with my career in social work and my more extroverted nature. Despite these differences, or perhaps because of them, we found common ground. We enjoyed long drives, jazz music, and the quiet comfort of each other's presence without the need for constant conversation. Living arrangements came naturally over time. Although James moved into my house, a cozy Victorian I had secured after my divorce, our lives maintained a certain partition. The house was in my name, and we had no shared property. His private nature meant I had little insight into his financial matters, though he was never hesitant to contribute to household expenses or surprise me with groceries or an unexpected household repair. However, the idea of marriage was off the table for James. He valued his independence too much, often stating that love didn't need the bonds of legal ties to validate it. In many ways, I agreed, appreciating the simplicity of our arrangement where love was a choice we made daily, not a contract we were obliged to fulfill. Yet despite our harmonious living and the stability of our respective careers, there were aspects of our relationship that remained unfulfilled. James was never one for grand romantic gestures. Birthdays and anniversaries were often marked with little fanfare. Gifts were practical rather than thoughtful, and celebrations were muted, often just an evening out at a restaurant we both liked. This lack of romance was something I had come to terms with, focusing instead on the reliability and steadiness James offered. Our relationship, while not fiery or adorned with the typical trappings of romance, was functional and comfortable. We had a healthy sex life, and our discussions, though rarely about our emotions, were always respectful and insightful. Yet, as the years wore on, I sometimes found myself longing for a bit more warmth, a bit more of the unexpected, the small surprises that make the heart flutter. The true test of our relationship, however, began in January when I was diagnosed with late-stage ovarian cancer. The news came as a devastating blow, not just to me but to the fragile equilibrium of our relationship. Cancer, with its insidious tendrils, seemed determined not only to wreak havoc on my body but also to unearth the foundations of my relationship with James. The morning I received the diagnosis, the world seemed to pause. An eerie stillness that belied the storm raging inside me. Late-stage ovarian cancer, the doctor had said, his voice a blend of compassion and clinical detachment. The words echoed in my head as I drove home, each syllable a weighty gavel marking the end of one life phase and the uncertain beginning of another. Arriving home, I found James in the backyard, lost in his latest project, a birdhouse he was crafting with meticulous attention. The normalcy of the scene, set against the backdrop of my devastating news, felt surreal. I watched him for a moment, absorbed in his task, unaware of the seismic shift about to enter our lives. "James," I called out, my voice steadier than I felt. He looked up, a smile breaking across his face, but it faltered as he took in my expression. The tools fell silent, and he was at my side in an instant, his earlier levity replaced by concern. "I have cancer," I said, the words blunt, irrevocable. His arms came around me then, a strong, steady presence. But inside, my heart was a chaos of fear and sorrow. In the privacy of our living room, I laid out the stark realities of my condition. The cancer was aggressive, widespread, and the treatment would be grueling. I watched his face, the emotions flickering through his eyes, shock, pain, resolve. And then, I gave him an out. An opportunity to walk away before the journey became too difficult, too steeped in medical routines and the shadow of mortality. It was a test, not of his love, but of his willingness to face this harsh road alongside me. He didn't hesitate. "I'm not going anywhere," he said firmly, squeezing my hand. "I promise to be with you, for better or worse." His words should have brought comfort, and they did, to some extent. But they also stirred a tumult of emotions within me, gratitude, relief, but also a deep, gnawing apprehension. James's decision to stay with me through my cancer diagnosis should have been a source of unwavering comfort. In some ways, it was. In others, It highlighted the gaps in our relationship that I had long ignored or downplayed. As I navigated the labyrinth of surgeries and chemotherapy, my mixed feelings about his decision became increasingly pronounced. James's willingness to stay was commendable, but his ability to provide the emotional and physical care I needed was painfully lacking. The first major challenge came with my initial surgeries. The doctors performed a hysterectomy and several other procedures to remove as much of the cancer as possible. The recovery was brutal. I was in and out of the hospital, dealing with intense pain, nausea, and an overwhelming sense of vulnerability. James was there, but in a way that felt more obligatory than heartfelt. He drove me to the hospital, sat in the waiting room, and took me home afterward. But once we were home, his role as a caregiver faltered. Managing medications was the first hurdle. The schedule was complex, with different pills at different times, some with food, some without. James struggled to keep it straight, often forgetting doses or mixing up the timings. I tried to make it easier by writing everything down and setting alarms, but it quickly became clear that this was a responsibility beyond his comfort zone. He would get frustrated, not at me, but at the situation, at the helplessness he felt. His frustration manifested in a withdrawn demeanor, leaving me to fend for myself more often than not. Then there were the basics of caregiving, ensuring I was hydrated, bringing me food, checking in on my comfort. James tried. He really did, but his efforts were often half-hearted. He would bring me a glass of water and then retreat to his workshop or his computer. Meals were an afterthought, usually something quick and easy, lacking the nourishment and care I needed. I found myself relying on meal delivery services more and more, realizing that the emotional support I craved was not forthcoming. As the chemotherapy began, my world narrowed to a series of treatments and side effects. Chemo was a relentless adversary, sapping my strength, stealing my hair, and leaving me perpetually nauseous. Each session felt like a battle, and though James drove me to a few of them, his presence was more logistical than comforting. He would drop me off and pick me up, but during the treatments, it was my friends and family who sat with me, held my hand, and talked me through the worst of it. My best friend Sarah was a godsend. She organized a meal train, ensuring that I had nutritious food every day. She coordinated with my family, making sure someone was always available to help. My sister Kate flew in from out of state multiple times, staying with me for weeks at a time. She was a natural caregiver, intuitively knowing what I needed before I even had to ask. Between Sarah, Kate, and other friends who stepped up, I was surrounded by a network of support that filled the gaps James couldn't bridge. One evening, after a particularly grueling day of chemo, I lay in bed, feeling the weight of everything pressing down on me. James sat at his desk, absorbed in his work, seemingly oblivious to the turmoil I was in. I watched him, the man I loved, and wondered how we had come to this point. His promise to stay had been genuine, but the reality of what staying meant was something neither of us had fully understood. My birthday in April was a turning point. Despite my exhaustion and the constant nausea, I had managed to celebrate James's birthday just a few days earlier. I ordered him a gift from Amazon, bought his favorite takeout, and even mustered the energy to bake him a cake. It wasn't much, but it was a gesture of love and normalcy in a time when everything felt uncertain. When my birthday arrived, I hoped for something, anything, to show that he cared, that he was thinking of me, even in the smallest way. But the day came and went without acknowledgement. No card, no gift, not even a simple happy birthday. The hurt was sharp and immediate, a reminder of the emotional chasm that had always been there but was now impossible to ignore. I didn't need grand gestures. I needed to know that I mattered, that my pain and struggle were seen and acknowledged. His oversight felt like a betrayal, a confirmation of all the doubts that had been simmering beneath the surface. The upcoming surgery was another significant hurdle. Scheduled for mid-May, it was to be a major operation, a hysterectomy and debulking surgery to remove as much of the remaining cancer as possible. The recovery time was estimated at 4 weeks, a period during which I would be at my most vulnerable, needing constant care and support. James, in his pragmatic way, informed me that he had scheduled an elective knee surgery for just 2 days after my operation. His knee had been bothering him for years, but the timing of this decision was bewildering and hurtful. When I expressed my concern, he insisted that his knee pain had suddenly become unbearable and that the surgery couldn't be postponed. His explanation felt like an excuse, a way to avoid the discomfort of my recovery by focusing on his own issues. It was as if he was retreating from the emotional intensity of my illness, seeking refuge in his own pain. During the week leading up to my surgery, James took time off work. Not to be with me, but to go camping and hiking, his way of decompressing before what he saw as a challenging period ahead. He returned home tan and relaxed, ready for his knee procedure, while I was left feeling abandoned, my own surgery looming with a sense of impending dread. The day of my surgery arrived, and I was surrounded by my family and friends, their presence a balm to my anxiety. James was there too, but his focus seemed divided, already anticipating his own upcoming procedure. He stayed with me through the pre-op preparations and kissed me softly before I was wheeled into the operating room, but his touch felt distant, his mind elsewhere. The surgery was a success, the doctors told me, but the recovery was arduous. I was weak, in pain, and emotionally raw. While I was still in the hospital, James underwent his knee surgery and returned home on crutches. When I was finally discharged, it was my sister who brought me home, ensuring I had everything I needed. James, on crutches and struggling with his own discomfort, was hardly in a position to care for me. The irony was not lost on me. 2 patients under one roof, each needing more than the other could give. My friends and family continued to step in, their support unwavering. They brought meals, helped with household chores, and provided the emotional sustenance that was so desperately needed. One afternoon, as I lay on the couch, too weak to move, James called out from the bedroom, asking if I could bring him some water. I stared at the ceiling, the absurdity of the situation sinking in. Here I was, barely able to care for myself, being asked to care for him. It was a moment of clarity, a painful realization that this relationship, as it stood, was untenable. James's aunt called me a few days later, her voice filled with concern. She had heard about my surgery and wanted to wish me well. She also expressed her surprise and disappointment at James's decision to have his knee surgery at such a critical time. "I believe he's experiencing some form of PTSD," she said gently. "His mother died of brain cancer when he was a teenager. She went through years of surgeries and treatments that ultimately failed. This behavior is out of character for him." Her words offered some explanation but no comfort. James's past, his trauma, didn't absolve him of his current actions. I could understand his fear, his retreat. But I couldn't accept it. Not when my own needs were so immediate and profound. As I embarked on the long and arduous road to recovery following my major surgery, the physical challenges were compounded by the emotional toll of navigating my relationship with James. Each day was a battle, not just against the cancer and the pain it brought, but also against the growing realization that the man I loved might not be the partner I needed in this crucial time. During the initial weeks of recovery, the intensity of my physical pain was matched only by the emotional strain of watching James focus largely on himself. While I struggled with the simplest tasks, grappling with my newfound frailty, James was absorbed with his own recovery from his knee surgery. His requests for help with tasks he couldn't manage on his crutches, even as I could barely manage my own needs, felt like a glaring testament to his self-centered approach. Lying on my bed one afternoon, the sounds of James fumbling in the kitchen trying to make himself lunch while I rested, I couldn't help but reflect on our situation. Is this what our relationship has come to? I thought. 2 people living under the same roof, each wrapped up in their own pain, unable to support each other? This internal monologue was a constant during those days, as I wrestled with my feelings of disappointment and abandonment. One evening, as I shared these thoughts over the phone with my sister Kate, she provided the kind of blunt assessment that only someone who loves you deeply can offer. "Liz, you've always known James wasn't great with emotional stuff. But this is different. This isn't just emotional support. It's basic care, compassion. You're recovering from cancer surgery, for heaven's sake. If he can't step up now, when will he ever?" Her words struck a chord. It wasn't just that James was failing to care for me. It was his apparent lack of insight into how his actions, or lack thereof, affected me. This conversation with Kate sparked a series of internal questions about the viability of our relationship. I found myself wondering if his inability to provide support was something I could live with in the long term, especially knowing that my battle with cancer could bring more challenges ahead. I also had long heart-to-hearts with Sarah, who had been instrumental in organizing support during my treatment. During one of her visits, as she sat by my bedside, I confided in her. "He's not mean, Sarah. He's just absent. I feel like I'm going through this alone, even though he's right here." Sarah took my hand, her presence a comforting anchor. "Liz, it's okay to acknowledge that something isn't working. It's okay to want more. You need a partner, especially now. It's not just about having someone physically present. You need someone who's truly with you, in every sense." These conversations, along with my own reflections, led me to a profound understanding. My need for a supportive partner was not just a preference but a necessity, especially as I faced the uncertainty of my health. James's focus on his own issues during my time of greatest need had illuminated a fundamental disconnect in our relationship. It was not merely about his lack of caregiving skills. It was about his inability to prioritize my needs during a critical time. This realization brought clarity but also sorrow. I grieved for the relationship that could not withstand the trials we faced. I mourned the future I had once envisioned with James, now overshadowed by the stark reality of our present circumstances. My decision to address these issues with James was not made lightly. I chose a quiet evening, a few weeks into my recovery, when I felt strong enough to have what I knew would be a challenging conversation. "James," I began, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "We need to talk about us. About how things have been since my surgery. I feel like I'm going through this recovery on my own, and it's made me think a lot about our future." James looked surprised, perhaps a little defensive. "I've been dealing with my knee," he started, but I gently cut him off. "I know, and I understand that's been hard on you. But I can't help feeling like we're not really here for each other. Not in the way I need us to be. This isn't just about now, it's about what this says for our future." The conversation that followed was painful, filled with moments of silence and mutual recognition of the painful truth. James admitted his struggles with facing my illness, echoing what his aunt had shared about his past. Yet understanding his reasons didn't alleviate the reality of my loneliness and the growing gap between us. As we talked, it became clear that our paths were diverging. The love and commitment that had once bound us were not enough to bridge the gap that had formed between our experiences and needs. Deciding to redefine our relationship was one of the hardest decisions I've ever made. Yet it was also a decision that brought me peace. In recognizing our limitations and acknowledging our needs, we were able to part ways with respect and a deep understanding of each other's struggles. The weeks following our conversation were a time of adjustment. As James moved out and we began our separate lives, I continued to lean on my support network. The love and care from my friends and family were instrumental in my recovery. They provided not just practical help but emotional sustenance, helping me rebuild my strength and reclaim my independence. Reflecting on this period, I realized that my journey through cancer and recovery was also a journey of self-discovery. I learned the importance of asking for what I need, of surrounding myself with people who can truly support me, and of letting go when a relationship no longer serves my best interests. In facing the end of my relationship with James, I found a new beginning for myself, one defined by resilience, hope, and the unwavering support of those who love me. Update. Reflecting on the tumultuous period of my life that followed my cancer diagnosis, I find a mixture of sorrow and clarity. When James promised he'd never leave me after I told him about my illness, I clung to that promise as a beacon of hope. Yet the reality of his presence, detached and insufficient, contrasted sharply with his words. It's a stark reminder of how adversity can reveal the true essence of a person's character and commitment. In the beginning, my heart was filled with gratitude when James said he would stay. However, as my treatment progressed and the demands of caregiving became apparent, his emotional withdrawal became increasingly obvious. It was like living with a shadow of the person I thought I knew. His physical presence in the house didn't translate into the emotional or practical support I desperately needed. It felt as though he was there, but not really with me. This was not just a failure to perform tasks. It was an absence of the compassion and partnership I needed at my most vulnerable. This experience forced me to confront a painful reality reflected in the grim statistics I had read about partners who leave or emotionally check out during illness. It was heartbreaking to recognize that James fit into this narrative. Despite his promise, he wasn't really with me. He was more of a roommate, and not a particularly good one at that, rather than the partner I needed him to be. His inability to support me, which I had hoped might be overcome by the gravity of my situation, seemed instead to deepen the existing fissures between us. My feelings of guilt, while natural, were also a reflection of the empathy and consideration I always strived to offer, even when it wasn't reciprocated. I realized these feelings were misplaced. I was battling cancer, fighting for my life, and also grappling with the emotional neglect from someone who was supposed to be my primary source of support. This realization was crushing but necessary. It wasn't just about the tasks he failed to perform. It was about his failure to be the emotional anchor I needed. Understanding that James's behavior might have been influenced by his own fears or past trauma, perhaps a PTSD response from his mother's death due to cancer, provided some context but no solace. It explained some of his actions but did not excuse them. While compassion for his struggles is important, it should not come at the expense of my own well-being. My health and emotional needs had to take precedence. The possibility that James hadn't left due to financial dependence or his own resentment about feeling trapped added another layer of complexity to our dynamic. It hinted at a relationship sustained not by mutual support and love but by circumstances and convenience, which perhaps made him act out or retreat into himself. Throughout this ordeal, I gave James numerous opportunities to rise to the occasion. Time and again, he showed that he either could not or would not meet the needs of the moment. This was not just about what he hadn't done. It was about what I needed and deserved and was not receiving. Recognizing this was crucial. It forced me to make hard decisions about what was best for my health and happiness. Navigating the end of our relationship was not easy, but it was necessary. I leaned heavily on my family, friends, and the broader support network I was fortunate to have. They showed up for me in ways that James did not, providing not only the practical support I needed but also the emotional care that helped sustain me through one of the most challenging times of my life. As I look back, I understand that it's okay to prioritize my well-being and to feel sad about the end of a relationship while also recognizing that it's the healthiest choice for me. Letting go of James was not just about ending a relationship that was no longer working. It was about reclaiming my life and focusing on my recovery with the support of people who truly cared for me. In this reflection, there is both loss and liberation. I mourn the partner James could not be but celebrate the strength I found in myself and the love and support from others that illuminated my darkest days. This journey has taught me about the resilience of the human spirit, the importance of self-care, and the power of a supportive community. As I continue to heal and rebuild my life, I carry these lessons with me, grateful for the clarity and purpose they have brought into my life. My partner often shows extreme jealousy and recently became paranoid, believing my new stretch marks were scratches indicating infidelity. My name is Emily, a 24-year-old woman navigating the intricate dance of love and life with my boyfriend Jack, who is 25. We've been together for 3 years, a period marked by highs and lows, laughter and tears, and the steady march towards understanding and trust. Our relationship began in the most unassuming of ways. A chance encounter at a mutual friend's barbecue. I remember the day vividly. The smell of grilled burgers wafting through the air, the sound of laughter and clinking glasses, and the warm summer breeze that seemed to whisper promises of something special. Jack and I were introduced by our friend Sarah, who had been trying to set us up for months. I was initially hesitant, having just come out of a tumultuous relationship, but Jack's easy smile and genuine interest in getting to know me slowly chipped away at my reservations. Our first conversation was about our mutual love for hiking, and it wasn't long before we were planning weekend trips to nearby trails. Those early days were filled with discovery and excitement, the kind of heady rush that comes with new love. Fast forward to the present, and we've settled into a cozy rhythm. We share a modest apartment in the city, a 2-bedroom space that we've made our own with mismatched furniture and walls adorned with photos from our adventures. Jack works as a software developer, a job that keeps him busy but allows for a flexible schedule. I, on the other hand, work as a freelance writer, a career that lets me work from home and be my own boss. Our living situation is comfortable, and though we have our disagreements, we've managed to build a life that feels stable and supportive. Recently, I've been on a personal journey to gain weight. For most of my life, I've struggled with being slightly underweight, a condition that left me feeling self-conscious and often drained my energy. With Jack's encouragement and my own determination, I embarked on a mission to put on some pounds in a healthy way. I started eating more balanced meals, incorporating strength training into my exercise routine, and keeping a close eye on my progress. In a few short months, I managed to gain about 7 pounds, and for the first time in years, I felt a sense of accomplishment when I looked in the mirror. However, this newfound weight came with unexpected changes. My body, adjusting to the rapid increase, began to show signs of stretching skin. Bright red and purple marks appeared on my thighs and buttocks. Stretch marks, a normal but surprising result of my efforts. I did my best to embrace them, reminding myself that they were a testament to my hard work and dedication to improving my health. Jack was supportive, often complimenting me on my progress and reassuring me that the stretch marks were nothing to be ashamed of. A typical day in our lives starts with the soft beep of Jack's alarm clock at 6:30 a.m. He's an early riser, often heading out for a morning run before diving into his work. I usually wake up around 7 a.m., greeted by the aroma of fresh coffee that Jack prepares before leaving for his run. Mornings are my favorite time of day, a quiet period where I can gather my thoughts and plan my tasks. I sit by the window with my coffee, watching the city come to life, and then settle down at my desk to write. Jack returns from his run around 8 a.m., sweaty but invigorated. We have breakfast together, a simple meal of eggs and toast, sometimes accompanied by a smoothie. Our conversations during breakfast are a mix of work plans, random musings, and shared jokes. After breakfast, Jack heads to his home office, and I return to my writing. The next few hours are spent in productive silence, punctuated by the occasional query or shared snippet from our respective tasks. By lunchtime, we both need a break. We usually eat together, taking the time to reconnect and discuss our progress. Afternoons are a bit more relaxed. Jack might have a few video calls, while I take a walk to clear my head or run some errands. Evenings are our time. We cook dinner together, experiment with new recipes, or indulge in our favorite comfort foods. After dinner, we might watch a movie, play a board game, or simply talk about our day. It's a routine that we've grown accustomed to, a comforting pattern that reinforces our bond. On the day everything changed, our routine started as usual. Jack had gone for his morning run, and I was enjoying my coffee by the window. The sky was a pale blue, streaked with the golden hues of dawn. Birds chirped outside, adding a melodic backdrop to the quiet of our apartment. I relished these moments of solitude, savoring the warmth of the coffee mug in my hands and the peacefulness of the early hour. I had planned to spend the day working on a new article about sustainable living practices, a topic I was passionate about. My notes were spread out on the desk, ready for me to dive into once I finished my coffee. Jack, meanwhile, had a series of meetings lined up for the day. He worked from home most of the time, his job as a software developer allowing him the flexibility to be present, even if his mind was often absorbed in code and algorithms. The morning passed without incident. Jack returned from his run, flushed and energized, and we enjoyed a hearty breakfast together. We talked about our plans for the day and shared a few laughs over a funny video I had found online. After breakfast, we retreated to our respective workspaces. I immersed myself in my writing, the hours slipping by as I crafted sentences and organized my thoughts. By noon the sun was high in the sky, casting a warm glow through the windows. We met for lunch, as we always did, a small ritual that helped us stay connected despite our busy schedules. Jack had made sandwiches, and we sat at the kitchen table, chatting about our work and upcoming plans. It was during this light-hearted conversation about an upcoming trip to the mountains that Jack first noticed the marks. We had been planning this trip for weeks, eager to escape the hustle and bustle of city life and reconnect with nature. I was excitedly talking about the hiking trails and the cozy cabin we had booked when I noticed Jack's gaze drift downward. "Emily, what are those marks on your butt?" he asked, his tone a mix of curiosity and concern. I glanced down, momentarily confused before realizing he had noticed the stretch marks that had recently appeared. I felt a flush of embarrassment but quickly composed myself. "Oh, those are just stretch marks," I replied, trying to keep my tone casual. "I've been gaining some weight, remember? It's just my skin adjusting." Jack's frown deepened. "They don't look like stretch marks. They look more like scratches." His words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken accusations. I felt a pang of frustration and sadness. "Jack, they're stretch marks. They might look red and angry now, but that's just because they're new. They come from underneath the skin, not from the outside." Michael's eyes narrowed slightly as he examined them, but his expression remained unreadable. The room, once filled with the lightness of a leisurely day, now seemed to close in on us with a tangible tension. He stared at me, his expression a mix of disbelief and confusion. "Are you sure? They really don't look like stretch marks to me." I nodded, trying to stay calm. "Yes, I'm sure. You can even look it up if you want. Stretch marks can look different on different people, but that's what they are." "Are you accusing me of lying?" I asked, the hurt clear in my voice. It was the first time in our 3-year relationship that I felt a chasm of mistrust opening between us. He didn't respond immediately. Instead, his eyes shifted away from me, fixing on the floor as if it held the answer he needed. Without a word, tears welled up in his eyes, an unusual sight for Michael, who always prided himself on his composure. I reached out to touch his arm, but he gently pulled away and left the room, leaving me alone with a mix of emotions swirling inside me. The sound of the front door closing echoed through the apartment, marking his departure as clearly as it shattered the peace of our day. The hours that followed were long and heavy. I sat on the edge of the bed, the indentations of his fingers still visible on my skin, replaying the conversation over and over in my mind. I couldn't understand where his sudden doubt had stemmed from. Had I missed signs of his insecurities before this? My thoughts spiraled, touching each memory, trying to find evidence of mistrust I might have overlooked. When Michael finally returned, the sun had begun to set, casting long shadows across the room that seemed to echo the darkness settling between us. I knew we needed to talk, to clear the air, or the gap that had opened up would only widen. "I want to talk about earlier," I started as soon as I saw him. He nodded, his face weary, his usual bright eyes dimmed. We sat down together, the space on the couch between us feeling like a gulf. "Do you have any reason not to trust me, or do you need reassurance or more attention in our relationship?" I asked, my voice soft but firm. It was crucial to understand his perspective, even if his suspicions had hurt me deeply. He stayed silent for a long time, his eyes not meeting mine. When he finally spoke, his voice was low. "No, but those marks. They don't make sense," he admitted, sounding as confused as he was uncertain. Trying to bridge the distance between us, I offered. "You can go through my phone whenever you want to," hoping transparency would reassure him. "Maybe you should talk to one of your friends about it," I added, thinking that perhaps external support might help him process his feelings better than I could alone. But he didn't like that suggestion. His face closed off, and he stood abruptly. "I don't need to talk to anyone," he said sharply, then stormed off to the other room, leaving me once again alone, the weight of our unresolved conflict pressing down on me like a physical force. We had not spoken since. As the door slammed shut behind Michael, the sharp sound seemed to cleave the air, leaving a palpable silence that settled heavily around me. Left alone in the diminishing light of the evening, I felt a cold draft sweep through the room, as if the open window was allowing the chill from outside to seep into the apartment, and into the spaces between us. In the quiet that followed, my mind began to whirl with thoughts and emotions. Shock was the first to settle in, thick and suffocating. I never imagined that Michael, the person I trusted most in the world, could suggest, even indirectly, that I might be unfaithful. The absurdity of his accusation that my stretch marks were scratches from someone else's nails was bewildering. Confusion followed close behind the shock. Why would Michael think such a thing? We had always been open with each other, sharing our thoughts and feelings without hesitation. This level of mistrust was new, alien. I replayed our conversation in my head, his words echoing, "They don't look like stretch marks." And I could feel a tinge of frustration bubbling inside me. How could he not trust my words? Sitting on the edge of our bed, the dim light of the bedside lamp casting long shadows across the room, I allowed my mind to drift to previous instances that might have hinted at this sudden burst of jealousy. There was that time at a company party when I had laughed a little too long at a coworker's joke, and I noticed Michael's eyes narrow across the room. Or when he had asked, with a thinly veiled tension, who I was texting late one evening when it was only my sister sharing updates about her new baby. Each memory, each little moment I could recall, seemed now like a thread in a larger tapestry I had not seen the whole of. Was there always an undercurrent of doubt that I had failed to notice? Or was this insecurity something new, something brought on by circumstances I could not understand? Feeling overwhelmed, I reached for my phone. I dialed my best friend, Sarah, needing the comfort of her voice, the reassurance of her perspective. She answered on the second ring, her voice a soothing balm to my frayed nerves. "Hey, what's up? You sound upset," she said, her tone immediately shifting to concern. I poured out the events of the day, my words tumbling out in a rush. As I spoke, I could hear Sarah's steady breathing on the other end of the line, a reminder of the calm I was desperately seeking. "That sounds really tough, but you know, Michael might just be going through something he's not ready to talk about," Sarah offered, always the voice of reason. "But it's also important that he knows he can't project his insecurities onto you." Her words were rational, but they only provided a small comfort against the torrent of emotions I felt. After we hung up, the loneliness crept back, heavier than before. The anxiety started to set in then, gnawing at the edges of my mind. What if Michael's doubts had roots deeper than just the misunderstandings of today? What if these seeds of mistrust grew into something more, something that could not be mended? The thought made my heart race, and I felt a profound sadness at the potential loss of something so dear. I felt misunderstood, isolated in my own relationship. It was as if Michael and I were suddenly speaking different languages, unable to understand each other's words, let alone our feelings. The realization was crushing. The emotional toll was more exhausting than I had anticipated. Sleep eluded me as I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the shadows seeming to mock my distress. Each time I closed my eyes, I saw Michael's tearful eyes, heard the disbelief in his voice, felt the growing distance between us. The sadness was a heavy cloak I couldn't seem to shed, and I missed him terribly, even though he was just in the next room. As dawn broke, the first light of morning casting a pale glow into the room, I knew something had to change. I couldn't let this misunderstanding fester and poison what we had built together. But as I prepared to face the day, to face Michael, the weight of uncertainty was a constant companion, making each step feel like wading through treacle. The house felt silent and cold when Michael finally came back. It was as if his departure had taken the warmth with him, and now his return brought back not the comfort of his presence, but the shadow of our unresolved issues. I had been sitting at the kitchen table, pretending to be absorbed in a book, but really, my mind had been racing with thoughts about our conversation, about his accusations, and about the future of our relationship. When I heard the door open, my heart skipped. I closed the book and stood up, smoothing my sweater, not sure what to expect. Would he apologize? Or would he continue to doubt me? The uncertainty was gnawing at me. "Michael," I called out as he entered the kitchen. He paused, his eyes meeting mine briefly before looking away. He looked tired. His usual bright eyes were clouded with something I couldn't quite decipher. Frustration, confusion, sorrow. "We need to talk," I said, my voice more steady than I felt. He nodded silently, hanging his coat on the rack and reluctantly joining me at the table. We sat across from each other, the tension thick in the air. "Michael, I want to understand why you felt the way you did today," I began, trying to keep my tone neutral. Do you have any reasons to distrust me, or is there something else that's bothering you? Do you need more reassurance or more attention from me in our relationship? He looked at his hands for a long moment before responding. His voice, when he finally spoke, was barely above a whisper. I don't know, it's just, those marks, they caught me off guard. I trust you, but I couldn't make sense of them. They don't look like what I thought stretch marks looked like. I listened quietly, keeping my emotions in check. I understand that it was unexpected, but you know I've been trying to gain weight. The doctor said rapid weight gain could cause stretch marks like these. But something had shifted in Michael. Instead of acknowledging the explanation, his face darkened, and his words became harsh, sharp like shards of glass. No, this doesn't make sense. Who have you been with? He shouted, his voice escalating as he began to list names. Male colleagues, friends, even distant acquaintances. Each name felt like an accusation, a wound. I stood there, stunned into silence for a moment, my heart pounding in my chest. Michael, stop. Why would you say those things? Tears began to form, blurring my vision as I heard him continue. Not just questioning my fidelity, but now attacking my profession. He didn't stop there. His anger spilled over to everything connected to me. My friends, my parents. And what about your so-called supportive friends? What role do they play in this? He spat out, each word laced with venom. I felt my own anger rising, hot and fierce. How dare you? I cried out, my voice cracking. The hurt was overwhelming. I was shaking, sobbing loudly, the tears streaming down my face. But he seemed lost to his rage, unable to see the pain he was inflicting, his suspicions spiraling out of control. The apartment, our home, felt like it was closing in on me, the walls echoing with the destructive force of his accusations. I watched, heartbroken, as he swept his arm across the coffee table, sending books and small trinkets crashing to the floor. His behavior was unlike anything I had ever seen from him. It scared me, seeing him like this, consumed by baseless jealousy. Michael, please, this isn't you. I pleaded between sobs, trying to reach out to him, to pull him back from the edge of this rage-filled precipice. But he was beyond my reach, his words slicing through the last threads of my composure. Finally, I couldn't bear it any longer. If you can't trust me, if you can't respect me, then what are we even doing? I shouted, my voice hoarse from crying. You need help, Michael, but so do I. We can't go on like this. Silence fell as my words hung in the air. He stopped, his chest heaving, looking around at the chaos he had caused, at the woman he claimed to love now crying uncontrollably because of his actions. It seemed to dawn on him then, the gravity of what had just unfolded between us. The moment was a painful wake-up call, a stark revelation of how deeply our trust had been eroded and how much healing would be necessary if there was any hope for us to move forward. Whether that path would be one we could walk together remained to be seen. The update. As I sat alone in the dim light of our living room, the shadows seemed to stretch across the walls, mirroring the darkening thoughts swirling in my mind. The echoes of Michael's angry words hung heavy in the air, a stark reminder of the storm that had just passed. He had stormed out again, leaving behind a silence that was thick with unrest and sorrow. This wasn't the first time jealousy had reared its ugly head in our relationship, but tonight, it had turned into sheer madness. Over the past year, I had noticed a troubling pattern in Michael's behavior. It started with small, seemingly insignificant comments about how I dressed for work or the occasional coffee with a friend. But gradually, these comments had morphed into accusations, heated arguments that would end in his tearful apologies and promises to change. Each time I believed him, hoping our love was strong enough to overcome these bouts of insecurity. But as I replayed those moments now, a chilling realization washed over me. It was getting worse, not better. Tonight had been different. The intensity of his anger, the sharpness of his words, everything was magnified. He hadn't just been upset or confused, he had been furious. Destructive. The apartment bore the physical marks of his rage. With shattered glass from a picture frame we had picked out together last Christmas lying scattered across the floor like fragments of our once happy memories. As I gathered the broken pieces, my mind raced with questions and fears about our future. Could I continue living like this, walking on eggshells, always anxious about what might set him off next? Was love really supposed to be this hard, this painful? My thoughts were interrupted by the sound of the front door. Michael was back, his face pale and his eyes red-rimmed from crying. He looked broken, remorseful. For a moment, my heart ached for him, for us. But then I remembered the fear, the feeling of helplessness as he had yelled and thrown things around, accusing me of betraying him over innocuous stretch marks that were merely the result of my efforts to be healthier. We need to talk, I said firmly as he stepped closer, his expression one of contrition. I know, I'm so sorry, he stammered, his voice cracking. I don't know what got into me. It's just, seeing those marks, it scared me. I thought I was losing you. His words pierced me with a sadness so deep it was almost physical. Michael. Your jealousy isn't new. It's been building up, and every time, it chips away a little more of my trust, my sense of safety with you. I love you, but I can't live like this. We can't keep going through these cycles. He nodded, swallowing hard. I know I need help. I'll do anything. See a therapist. Anything you need. Please. Don't give up on us. But as much as I wanted to believe him, the fear of what might happen if we stayed together haunted me. What if his jealousy turned even more destructive? What if next time, he didn't just break things but broke us beyond repair? I need to think, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I need some space to figure out what's best for us, for me. I'm scared, Michael. I'm scared of what you might do, what you might think of me. That you might believe I betrayed you even if we just break up. He looked devastated, but he nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. Okay, I'll stay at my brother's tonight. Take all the time you need, he replied, his tone resigned. After he left, the silence returned, but now it was a silence of solitude, not of anticipation. I pondered over everything, our love, the good times we had shared, and the darkness that had slowly enveloped us. I wondered if ending things would lead him to think I had someone else, if it would prompt him to do something drastic out of a misguided sense of betrayal. The decision lay heavily on me. Continuing as we were was untenable, but the implications of ending things were frightening in their own right. Either choice carried its own set of fears and potential regrets. I realized then that the most immediate need was not just deciding whether to stay or leave, but ensuring both our safeties, emotional and physical. Perhaps a mediated conversation with a therapist present, or a clear safety plan, would be the first steps. Ending a relationship scared me, but continuing in fear scared me more. As the night deepened, so did my resolve. Tomorrow I would call a counselor, someone who could guide us through this, whether it ended in reconciliation or separation. But tonight, I would allow myself to grieve. The loss of the relationship I thought we had. The future I had imagined, and the peace I so desperately craved. After we divorced, my best friend said she loved me. How I struggled to preserve our friendship amid military demands. My name is Jack, and I am a 40-year-old military man who has seen more of the world than most, and more of life's hardships than I care to remember. If you looked at my life from a distance, you might see a successful career and a well-disciplined individual. However, if you looked closer, you would see the scars, both physical and emotional, that tell the true story of my journey. One constant throughout this tumultuous journey has been my best friend Sarah. Our bond, forged in the fires of youthful ambition and tempered by the trials of adult life, has been a source of strength and solace for both of us. Sarah and I met during our freshman year at college, back when the world seemed full of endless possibilities and our biggest concerns were passing exams and finding the best coffee on campus. She was an aspiring writer, her head always buried in a book or her fingers flying across the keys of her laptop as she crafted stories that were as vibrant and full of life as she was. I, on the other hand, was a latecomer to the military dream, still weighing my options and trying to soak up as much civilian life as I could before committing to a career that would take me far from the familiar. Our friendship began in the most unremarkable way. Seated next to each other in an early morning psychology class that neither of us particularly enjoyed. We bonded over our shared disdain for the ungodly hour and our mutual need for black coffee to kickstart our brains. From there, our friendship blossomed. We became inseparable, spending countless hours studying together, attending parties, and sharing our deepest fears and ambitions. Sarah had a way of seeing through my tough exterior, and I found comfort in her unwavering belief in me, even when I doubted myself. When I decided to enlist, it was Sarah who encouraged me, even though she knew it meant we would see less of each other. She understood my need to serve and supported my decision wholeheartedly. Her letters, filled with mundane details of her day-to-day life and snippets of her latest stories, were a lifeline during the grueling months of basic training. They reminded me of the world outside the barracks, a world where someone cared deeply for me and believed in my potential. As the years passed, our lives took different paths, but our friendship remained constant. I married young, caught up in a whirlwind romance with a woman named Lisa. Lisa was vibrant, adventurous, and seemed to understand the demands of a military life better than anyone else I'd met. We met through mutual friends, and our connection was immediate. We were drawn to each other's intensity and the promise of adventure. Lisa and I didn't have children, partly due to the uncertainty and instability of my military career. We both agreed early on that bringing a child into such a tumultuous lifestyle wasn't fair. At first, our relationship thrived on the excitement of our shared adventures and the thrill of our romance. However, the reality of long deployments and the strain of constant separation soon took its toll. Being apart for months at a time created a distance between us that grew with each passing year. While Lisa was supportive and understanding at first, the loneliness and isolation began to wear on her. She had her own dreams and ambitions, and waiting for me to come home wasn't part of the plan she envisioned for herself. For my part, I found solace and purpose in my work, but each return home felt more alien. The woman I had married was still there, but the connection that had once bound us had frayed beyond repair. Our marriage ended in a quiet, mutual agreement. We sat down one evening after I had returned from a particularly grueling deployment and had an honest conversation. Both of us acknowledged that we were better off apart. There were no dramatic fights or bitter accusations, just a somber understanding that our paths had diverged too far to ever converge again. The love we once shared had been eroded by time and distance, leaving behind a respectful but irrevocable separation. After the breakup, I was not sad but relieved. I felt a weight lift off my shoulders, a burden of trying to maintain a relationship that had long since lost its spark. The constant worry about Lisa's well-being and her growing dissatisfaction had been a source of constant stress. Now, with the relationship behind me, I could focus entirely on my career without the nagging guilt of leaving someone behind. It was a bittersweet freedom. I mourned the loss of what could have been but felt liberated from the constraints of a partnership that no longer fit either of us. In the aftermath, I poured myself into my work, finding solace in the structure and purpose the military provided. Yet, despite the relief, there was an underlying sense of skepticism about love and its promises. The experience left me wary, hesitant to dive into another relationship that might end the same way. I became more guarded, cautious of letting anyone get too close, fearing the same cycle of excitement, distance, and eventual disintegration. Through all this, Sarah remained a constant in my life. She was the one person I could confide in, the one who knew me better than anyone else. She listened without judgment, offering comfort and understanding as I navigated the emotional aftermath of my divorce. Our friendship was a safe harbor, a place where I could be vulnerable without fear. Little did I know that this unwavering bond would soon be tested in ways neither of us could have anticipated. Sarah, meanwhile, seemed to have found her own fairy tale. She married Mark, a fellow writer she met at a literary workshop. Mark was charming, witty, and seemed to understand Sarah's passion for storytelling better than anyone else. Their wedding was a picturesque event, celebrated in a garden surrounded by friends and family. They settled into a cozy home filled with books, laughter, and the promise of a happily ever after. They had 3 beautiful children, and their life seemed like the perfect story Sarah had always dreamed of writing. But as the years went by, the cracks in their perfect facade began to show. It started subtly, with Mark's criticisms about Sarah's writing and parenting choices. He would dismiss her stories as trivial and question her decisions with the children, undermining her confidence at every turn. His charming exterior masked a cruel and controlling nature that slowly eroded Sarah's spirit. Late one night, I received a call from Sarah. Her voice trembled as she confided in me the true extent of her suffering. Mark had become a tyrant, subjecting her and the children to emotional and physical abuse. He belittled her dreams, calling her writing worthless and accusing her of being a terrible mother. He isolated her from friends and family, making her feel alone and trapped in her own home. Sarah described nights filled with fear, where Mark's temper would flare over the smallest perceived slight. He would yell and throw things, his rage unpredictable and terrifying. The children would hide in their rooms, scared and confused, while Sarah tried to shield them from the worst of it. She spoke of bruises hidden beneath long sleeves and a heart weighed down by constant dread. Mark's control was absolute. He monitored her phone calls, restricted her movements, and ensured she had no access to money or resources to escape. The breaking point came when Mark's abuse escalated to a physical assault that left Sarah with a broken rib and a resolve to protect her children at all costs. She described the night she gathered the courage to leave, sneaking out in the dead of night with her kids, a few essential belongings, and the hope of finding safety. She found refuge in a shelter for abused women, where she finally felt a semblance of security. The divorce that followed was a brutal and painful process. Mark fought for custody, using every tactic to intimidate and manipulate Sarah. The legal battles were long and exhausting, draining her both financially and emotionally. Despite the scars, both visible and hidden, Sarah emerged from the ordeal determined to rebuild her life for the sake of her children. As she told me her story, I felt a deep sorrow for her. Sarah had always been strong and resilient, but this experience had left her vulnerable and broken. I remembered the vibrant, passionate woman I had fallen for in college, and it pained me to see her so worn down. My heart ached for her and her children, who had endured so much pain at the hands of a man who should have cherished them. Sarah's depression was palpable. She spoke of sleepless nights, haunted by memories of Mark's cruelty, and days where the weight of it all seemed too much to bear. Her once bright eyes were now shadowed with sadness, and the spark of creativity that had defined her seemed dimmed. She expressed a profound loneliness, a need for love and support from those around her. She felt lost and overwhelmed, struggling to navigate a new reality without the safety net of her former life. I found myself feeling not just sorry for Sarah, but a deep sense of responsibility and a renewed surge of the feelings I had once harbored for her. She needed more than just a friend. She needed someone who could offer her the love and security that had been so cruelly stripped away. I wanted to be that person for her, to help her heal and rebuild her life, but the complexities of our situations made it difficult. Sarah's story reignited a protectiveness within me. I wanted to be there for her, to provide the emotional support she so desperately needed. I felt a fierce determination to help her find her way back to the vibrant, strong woman she had once been. Yet the constraints of my military life and her obligations as a mother made the path ahead uncertain and fraught with challenges. As I sat in my quarters, reflecting on everything Sarah had endured, I knew that our bond was more important than ever. She needed to know she wasn't alone, that someone cared deeply for her and her children. I vowed to support her in any way I could, even if it meant putting my own feelings aside. Sarah deserved happiness and love, and I was determined to help her find it, no matter how long it took or how difficult the journey might be. The day I received Sarah's call, detailing the horrific reality of her marriage and subsequent divorce, I knew I had to see her. It was impossible to offer her the support she needed over the phone. I needed to be there, in person, to provide any comfort and strength I could. I took leave from my duties, something I rarely did, because this was too important. The anticipation of seeing Sarah again, under such dire circumstances, filled me with a mixture of anxiety and determination. As I packed my bags, I was flooded with memories of our time together in college. I remembered the countless nights we stayed up talking, the coffee dates, and the unspoken bond that had always existed between us. I was anxious about seeing her, knowing the pain she had endured and the scars it had left. Yet I was also filled with a sense of purpose. Sarah needed me, and I was determined to be there for her. The journey to her home state felt like an eternity. I replayed our conversations in my mind, trying to prepare myself for what I might find. I was worried about her, about the toll the abuse and the divorce had taken on her and the kids. As the plane touched down, I took a deep breath, steeling myself for the emotional reunion. I arrived at her house in the early afternoon. It was a modest, cozy place, much like the home she had described to me in her letters and phone calls. As I approached the door, my heart raced. I rang the bell, and within moments, the door swung open. There she stood. Sarah, looking both familiar and heartbreakingly different. She looked tired, worn down by the struggles she had faced. Her once vibrant eyes were now shadowed with a sadness that cut me to the core. Yet, there was still a spark of the Sarah I knew. The strength and resilience that had always defined her. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she wore a casual outfit. But there was an elegance to her that no amount of hardship could diminish. "Jack," she said, her voice a mix of relief and emotion. We stood there for a moment, just taking each other in, before she stepped forward and wrapped her arms around me. I held her tightly, feeling the weight of everything she had been through in the way she clung to me. We spent the first few hours catching up, easing into more lighthearted topics. We reminisced about our college days, laughing at old memories and the silly things we used to do. It was comforting to slip back into that familiar rhythm, to remember the carefree days when our biggest concerns were exams and weekend plans. But as the day turned into evening, the conversation naturally shifted to more serious topics. Sarah opened up about the extent of the abuse she had endured. She told me about the nights filled with fear, the constant belittlement, and the physical violence that had become a part of her daily life. Her voice trembled as she recounted these experiences, and I could see the pain etched into her features. "I felt so trapped, Jack," she said, tears welling up in her eyes. "There were days when I thought I wouldn't make it through. But I had to stay strong for the kids. They needed me." I listened, my heart breaking for her. I wanted to reach out and hold her, to take away all her pain. But I knew there was only so much I could do. Still, being there, listening, and offering my support felt like a small step in the right direction. Over the next few days, we fell into a comfortable routine. We would spend the mornings talking, sharing coffee, and helping her with whatever tasks needed to be done around the house. Afternoons were spent with her kids, who were slowly starting to open up to me. Evenings were a time for reflection, where Sarah and I would sit on her porch, talking about everything and nothing, enjoying the peace of each other's company. It was during one of these quiet evenings that the atmosphere began to shift. We had been talking about our college days, laughing at some of the antics we got up to, when Sarah's expression grew more serious. She looked down at her hands, fidgeting slightly, and I could sense there was something she wanted to say but was struggling to find the words. "Jack," she began, her voice hesitant. "There's something I need to tell you." I turned to her, giving her my full attention. "What is it, Sarah?" She took a deep breath, her eyes meeting mine with a mix of hope and fear. "I love you, Jack. I always have." Her words hung in the air, and for a moment, everything seemed to stop. I could see the tears streaming down her face, the raw emotion in her eyes. My mind raced, trying to process what she had just said. In another life, under different circumstances, her confession might have been the beginning of a beautiful new chapter. But the reality of our situations made things far more complicated. "Sarah," I said softly, reaching out to take her hand. "I care about you so much. You mean the world to me. But you've been through so much, and I'm not sure this is the right time for you to make such a decision." She looked at me, a mixture of desperation and longing in her eyes. "I know it's a lot, Jack. But I've never been more certain of anything. You've always been there for me, and I can't imagine my life without you." I squeezed her hand gently. "I understand, but you need to take time to heal. You've been hurt so badly, and I don't want you to make a decision based on your need for comfort right now. You deserve more than that. You deserve a relationship that's built on more than just the aftermath of pain." She nodded slowly, tears still falling. "I just don't want to be alone. I need someone to be there for me. To protect me. I will always be here for you, Sarah, I promised. But we need to take this slow. Let's focus on helping you and the kids heal first. We can talk about us when you're in a better place." She looked at me for a long moment, then nodded again, a hint of a smile breaking through her tears. "Okay, Jack. I trust you." We sat there for a while longer, holding hands and watching the stars come out. The tension that had built up over the past few days seemed to dissipate, replaced by a sense of understanding and mutual respect. We knew that the road ahead would be difficult, but we also knew that we would face it together, no matter what. As my visit drew to a close, the reality of our separation began to set in. We spent our last day together trying to make the most of our time, but there was an unspoken sadness between us. When it was finally time for me to leave, we stood on her porch, holding each other tightly. "Take care of yourself, Sarah," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "And take care of those kids. You're stronger than you know." She nodded, tears in her eyes. "I will, Jack, and you take care of yourself too. Come back to us when you can." "I will," I promised, pulling her into one last hug. "I'll be in touch. We'll get through this, I promise." As I walked away, I felt a mix of emotions, sadness, hope, and a determination to do whatever I could to support Sarah from afar. Our friendship had always been a source of strength for both of us, and I knew that no matter what the future held, we would find a way to navigate it together. The journey ahead was uncertain, but with Sarah in my life, I knew I could face whatever came next. Returning to my base, I found myself consumed by thoughts of Sarah and the impossible situation we found ourselves in. The days were long and filled with routine duties, but my mind was constantly drifting back to the moments we shared during my visit. The sound of her laughter, the touch of her hand, and the weight of her confession played on a loop in my head. I had hoped that seeing her would bring clarity, but instead, it had only intensified my confusion and worry. Our conversations, once easy and light, became strained as we navigated the new dynamic between us. In the past, we had been able to talk about anything and everything without hesitation. Now every word felt loaded with unspoken emotions and unresolved issues. I could sense the tension in her voice during our phone calls, and I knew she felt the same from my end. I tried to explain the complexities of my life to her, hoping she would understand the barriers that stood between us. "Sarah, my life is unpredictable," I told her one evening, pacing the small confines of my quarters. "The constant relocations, the secrecy of my missions, and the ever-present danger. It's not a life I would wish on anyone, especially not someone I care about as much as I care about you." She listened quietly, her silence a stark contrast to the lively exchanges we once had. "I understand, Jack," she said finally, her voice soft. "But at least I'd get to see you a bit, and if it was for even a year or two, I'd be okay." Her words broke my heart because I knew she was speaking from a place of deep loneliness and a desperate need for safety and love. She had endured so much, and I wanted nothing more than to be the one to make it all better. But I knew, deep down, that I couldn't provide the stability and security she and her children needed. "Sarah, you deserve more than I can offer," I said, struggling to keep my emotions in check. You need someone who can be there for you and the kids, someone who can provide the kind of stability you all need. But I don't care about stability right now, Jack, she replied, her voice rising with frustration. I just want to feel safe and loved. I just want to be with you. The desperation in her voice was palpable, and it tore at my heart. I wanted to tell her that I felt the same, that I wished for nothing more than to be with her. But the reality of our situations made that impossible. I couldn't ask her to live a life of uncertainty and fear, constantly wondering where I was and if I would come back. As the days turned into weeks, our communications dwindled to quick, "How are you?" messages, neither of us knowing how to bridge the gap that had formed between us. The easy rapport we once had was replaced by a strained politeness, and every conversation felt like walking on eggshells. We both avoided the elephant in the room, the unspoken feelings that had complicated our friendship. The distance, both physical and emotional, grew, and I feared that I was losing my best friend. The woman who had pulled me out of some of my darkest moments was now the source of my greatest inner turmoil. I missed the simplicity of our old conversations, the way we could talk for hours about everything and nothing. Now, every interaction was tinged with the weight of what we weren't saying. In the quiet moments, when I was alone in my quarters, I would replay our conversations in my mind, trying to find a way to make things right. I knew she was struggling too, dealing with the aftermath of her divorce and trying to rebuild her life for the sake of her children. I wanted to be there for her, to support her in any way I could, but the limitations of my career made that almost impossible. The guilt of not being able to give her what she needed weighed heavily on me. I had always been the one she could rely on, the one who was there for her no matter what. Now, I felt like I was failing her when she needed me the most. It was a cruel twist of fate that the one time she needed me to be present and stable, I was more transient and unpredictable than ever. I began to fear that our friendship might not survive this test. The thought of losing Sarah, the one person who truly understood me, was almost too much to bear. She had been my anchor through so many storms, and now I felt adrift without her. I clung to the hope that we would find a way to navigate this new terrain, but with each passing day, that hope seemed to slip further away. One evening, after a particularly grueling day, I sat down to write her a letter. I poured my heart into it, trying to explain how much she meant to me and how desperately I wanted to find a way to be there for her. I told her about the guilt and the fear, the longing and the hope. But as I read it over, I realized that words alone wouldn't be enough to bridge the gap between us. The complexities of our lives required more than heartfelt letters and late-night phone calls. Despite the challenges, I knew I couldn't give up on our friendship. Sarah was too important to me. I resolved to keep trying, to find a way to support her even from a distance. I reminded myself that true friendship could withstand even the most daunting obstacles, and I clung to that belief as I faced each new day. As the weeks turned into months, we both adjusted to our new normal. Our conversations, though still strained, became more frequent as we found a way to navigate the complexities of our feelings. We learned to focus on the positives, to cherish the moments we could share, even if they were few and far between. Slowly, the tension began to ease, and the warmth of our old friendship started to return. I continued to remind Sarah that she deserved the best, that she needed to focus on healing and providing a stable environment for her children. She began to see a therapist, something I had encouraged from the beginning, and I could hear the difference it made in her voice. She sounded stronger, more hopeful, and that gave me a sense of peace. Our friendship, though tested by fire, emerged stronger. We both understood that the love and respect we had for each other were worth fighting for. We learned to accept the limitations of our circumstances, and to appreciate the connection that had sustained us through so many trials. In the end, it wasn't a perfect solution, but it was enough. We had each other, even if from a distance, and that was a comfort neither of us could take for granted. Our bond, forged in the fires of youth and tempered by the trials of adulthood, proved resilient and enduring. And as we faced the uncertain future, we did so with the knowledge that we could weather any storm as long as we had each other. Update. There are some things I left out of my previous recounting, and I feel it's important to address them to provide a clearer picture of my situation and the feelings involved. Do you love her or not? Yes, I love Sarah. Not just as a friend, but deeply and profoundly. She is the only person I can truly open up to, sharing my most vulnerable feelings without fear of judgment. When we first met, I developed feelings for her almost immediately, and fell hard. I remember the day I confessed my feelings to her vividly. She gently told me she had a boyfriend, who later became her husband and now ex-husband. Heartbroken, I backed off and for a couple of years, we didn't speak. Life went on, but those feelings never completely faded. Looking back, I often wonder how different my life might have been if we had gotten together back then. I think I would have been much happier, and perhaps she would have been spared some of the pain she endured in her marriage. Bro, you're 40. Aren't you retiring from the military? I joined the military later than most, which means I still have some years left before I can retire. I recently re-upped and have another 5 years on my current contract. For those who are curious, I'm trying to stay as anonymous as possible, so I won't disclose my branch of service. The military has been my life for so long, and while it has its rewards, it also brings with it a significant number of challenges, especially when it comes to personal relationships. How do you ever expect to have a relationship given your situation? The issues surrounding a potential relationship with Sarah are incredibly complicated. She just got divorced and has alimony and child support to consider. Additionally, she is barred from cohabitation and cannot leave her home state due to custody arrangements. If these restrictions weren't in place, it might be easier for us to consider a future together. I could potentially move her and her kids to wherever I'm stationed stateside. But even then, the unpredictable nature of my job means I'd often have to leave her and the children behind, creating a life of uncertainty. Especially with her wound still fresh, I don't want to add to her stress or make her life more complicated. The lifestyle of a military man is not easy for most women to accept. There are long deployments, missed holidays, and the constant risk associated with my job. While there are women within the military community who understand this, forming a relationship within the same environment brings its own set of challenges and complications. I call BS. This isn't real because XYZ. Believe what you will, but this is my reality. One of my biggest fears is something happening to me and Sarah not being informed. I have no immediate family left, my parents passed away, and my brother recently died. If something were to happen to me, Sarah might not be notified because we wouldn't be able to marry until her alimony runs out. While I could use the "it's classified" excuse to avoid lying about my whereabouts, I still feel that withholding information would be a betrayal of her trust. When I went to visit Sarah, I might have overdone it. I wanted to make her feel special and appreciated after everything she had been through. Her ex-husband treated her so horribly, and I felt she deserved to be taken out and treated well. I took her to nice restaurants, bought her thoughtful gifts, and we spent a lot of time together. I wanted to show her that she deserved to be loved and cherished, but in doing so, I might have sent mixed signals. During my visit, we ended up hooking up. It was a moment of weakness on my part, and while I don't regret being with her, I regret the emotional turmoil it caused her. We had been caught up in the moment, and it felt right at the time. Sarah later told me she had expected it to happen and that she enjoyed every moment. However, she didn't anticipate how it would make her feel afterwards. She repeatedly assured me that she doesn't normally do things like this, but she felt completely safe with me, and it was a very special experience for her. In hindsight, I realized that not restraining myself contributed to her emotional pain. We talked about it, and she said it was fine, but I could see the lingering effects it had on her. She felt even more attached and conflicted, and I hated myself for being part of the reason she was hurting. Sarah deserved someone who could be there for her fully, someone who could offer stability and support, and I wasn't in a position to provide that. Since returning to my base, I've tried to maintain our friendship, but it's been challenging. Our conversations, once easy and natural, have become strained and awkward. The dynamic between us has shifted, and I fear that we may never get back to where we were. The woman who has been my rock and my confidant is now the source of my greatest inner turmoil. I feel an overwhelming sense of responsibility to protect her, but I am limited by my circumstances. As time goes on, I hope that Sarah finds the peace and stability she deserves. I will always be there for her, even if it's from a distance. Our bond is strong, and I believe it can withstand even this. But for now, I must focus on my duties and trust that we will find a way to navigate this complex and challenging situation together.